This is the D6 generation with your hosts, Craig Gallant.
No, cut that. Keep that. Someday it's going to be worth something.
Russ Wakelin.
You put me in an ATST with frickin' Wookiees attacking me and whatnot?
Now you're talking. And Crstal Pisano in the third chair.
I've got Wit and I've got Blitz.
With contributions from Total Fangirl.
Vampires do not sparkle.
And our loyal listener.
Crazy? That's like 400 hours of gamer nonsense.
Welcome to another edition of Rapid Fire, the roundtable discussion of all things gaming, coming to the speed of a very fast unit with a really fast reaction on the turn dial.
What?
Today's edition is brought to you by Mal Brick, Malcolm Jr., Marcus Bone, Mark de Blasi, and just plain Marcus. Those are Patreon patrons, and you could be one too. Go and check it out today. I'm Geekly McNerd again, your host. Today our panelists are Russ, Widow Trara Wakelin, and special guest, Boardgame Blitzer, Crstal Durek Pathfinder Pisano. Let's begin. Issue number 1. Blitzkrieg, German for lightning war, is a method of warfare whereby an attacking force spearheaded by a dense concentration of armored and motorized or mechanized infantry formations with close air support breaks through an opponent's line of defense by short, fast, powerful attacks and then dislocates the defenders using speed and surprise to encircle them. Question. The purpose of Blitzkrieg clearly is to defeat the enemy in a decisive Vernichtungsschlacht. What in the world does Vernichtungsschlacht mean? Gerd von Rundstedt Ross.
A lightning attack.
Wilhelm Canaris Crstal.
Ridiculous means of defeat.
I expected better from both of you, especially you German Wakelin.
I like her.
Clearly that is German for Battle of Annihilation.
Oh, yes.
Jeez, come on. Lightning War, Battle for Annihilation. It's ridiculous. Issue number 2. This one's for you, Crstal. Linguistic determinism is the idea that language and its structures limit and determine human knowledge or thought, as well as thought processes such as categorization, memory, and perception. The term implies that people of different languages have different thought processes. Question. Attempting to utilize the concept of linguistic determinism, French philosopher Jacques Derrida dissected terms of hidden paradigmatic hierarchies and he found within various languages. What basic word pairings, only having meaning when put together, did Derrida's studies focus on? Jersey Rubach Russ.
I'm going to go with puns.
Dennis Crstal's Crstal.
Oh my gosh, I actually know the word for this and I can't remember it. When you combine two
that
words,
is the
I'm the worst.
True tragedy. Actually, I think what you're looking for is portmanteau, which is not the answer.
Oh,
the
that
answer
is what I was thinking.
The hidden paradigmatic hierarchies of which we refer, father-son and mother-daughter. Neither of which exists without the other. I would have also accepted podcaster listener, because why not?
What?
Issue number 3. Here's another one. Etymology is the study of the history of words, their origins, and how their form and meaning have changed over time. By extension, the term the etymology of a word means the origin of the particular word. Question. Etymological theory recognizes that words originate through a limited number of basic mechanisms. What is one of those most important? Kazimierz Reimet Russ.
I'm going to go with audio.
John Kirdani Crstal.
I would say written language.
Sadly, you're on the wrong track. I would have accepted language change, borrowing, word formation, and onomatopoeia. Issue number 4. No good war game goes complete without a fleshed-out world in which the fighting can occur. The most innovative mechanics aren't worth much if the battle occurs in a gray, empty void. The world of Terranoth is fleshed out by almost any definition, currently pulling on 6, soon-to-be 7 games that match heroes, monsters, armies, and overlords against each other in a high fantasy setting. Question. Name 4 of the 10 heroes that exist across all 6 current Terranoth games, not including Runewars the Miniature Game, of course. Red Scorpion Russ.
I was going to say Red Scorpion, Mock. I'm drawing a blank. Crstal, take 2 more.
I don't even... Mock, I know, he's one of the ogres, right? I can't remember. I only own one of the games, and I'm the worst.
And it all falls apart right there with Russ providing the first 2 and sadly not enough to not be wrong. Brother Garum, Chalara, Hugo, Krutzbeck, Lendl and Titania, Red Scorpion, Elder Mock, Lisa, and Jonas. And I wouldn't have even given you Mock because you didn't give him his title. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening and good night.
This episode of the D6 Generation is brought to you by Lone Wolf Development. Take your game to the next level.
And by Geek Nation Tours. Rise up and join the Geek Nation, touring the world at geeknationtours.com.
And by Audible. Try the service, get a free book, and support the show. All by visiting audibletrial.com/D6G.
Hello.
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 Hey, and welcome to episode 210, Craig. 210.
That sounds big.
Of
Now
the-
they're just sounding surreal.
Now it's just getting crazy. Of the D6 Generation, I'm Russ Wakelin.
I'm Craig Gallant.
And I'm Crstal Pisano.
Crystal, welcome. We are so excited to have you here on the show. Crystal, for our listeners who may not have discovered Crystal's amazing podcast, she is, of course, a third of the triumvirate. That is the Boardgame Bliz podcast.
Triumvirate. You'll notice that Russ is not super super focused on
alliteration. Proper pronunciation is not really my forte.
Oh my gosh, it's not mine either. So you're in good company.
Excellent. See that we're in good shape then. So, Crystal, thank you for coming on the show. We are so excited to have you here. Big fans of Boardgame Blitz. We'll talk more about it later, but you guys have been doing Boardgame Blitz now for how long? Has it been almost 8 months now?
It's been almost a year, actually. Our 1 year anniversary is coming up in May, so we're getting close to being a year.
Fantastic. So we're excited. And, of course, we're going to talk to Crystal in great detail a little later. It's interesting because Boardgame Blitz, of course, is a half-hour format podcast, correct?
Yes, it is a half hour every time without fail, except for when we run a tiny bit long with the bloopers, but that doesn't count.
And we are going to give you now, in this particular episode, 6 Boardgame Blitz episodes worth of Crystal right here.
That's way more Crystal than anyone ever really needs.
I don't know.
Occasionally.
Technically, it's like between 6 and 8.
Right. So this is a Crystal-filled
On
edition
average.
here. Almost a half a year with a Boardgame Blitz going on right here.
It's a Crystal extravaganza.
It is. We're excited to have you here. So, of course, we're going to talk...
Crystal-palooza, if you will.
Crystal Palooza. If that's not a thing already, we're making it one now.
It should be hashtag new one. Let's make it up as we go. So this is awesome. So we're going to have Crystal. We're going to talk to her in a little more detail about what got her into, the origin story of Crystal's gamerdom life, as well as the origin story of Boardgame Blitz. But then later, secret little known fact about Crystal. She's a big fan of Runebound, right?
I am. It's one of the games that actually got me into the hobby.
See, this is awesome. And of course, Rune Wars has just literally hit the streets thanks to Adepticon. So Craig and I got a good chance to not only get our own copies, but play a bit. And so we'd love to talk to you, our listeners, more about how it works, but also really to get Crystal's feeling on, since she's a board gamer but loves the world. Is this the kind of game that would draw a board gamer into a miniature game? So this would be interesting to talk about it too a little bit. But before we get to all that, we have a couple little things. First of all, we were lucky enough to bump into Crystal at Dunkin' Donuts not too long ago. Crystal, do you remember what we talked about in Dunkin' Donuts?
Yeah, well, I was busy focusing on my cronut for most of the time that we were there.
As
but,
you should,
when I did decide to pay attention to the conversation, we actually talked about the movie Arrival.
We did. And we had a great, and of course, Crystal, we discovered on this that Crystal is into linguistics, so, made a good pairing with Arrival. Now, we should warn you that this particular conversation is what you would call spoiler-filled. Is that not correct, Craig?
Spoiler-filled is a good way to put it.
It is. So do not listen to that episode if you have not seen Arrival yet. You would like to enjoy it the way it was intended. However, if you've already seen Arrival and you would like to know, Crystal, our own opinions about this fine film, Craig, what would someone do to be able to have access to the lost chapters?
Well, I would say the best way to do that would be to go to the website, the d6generation.com, and there you're going to find one of the buttons on the right is going to be the Patreon button, and you're just going to push on that. You're going to go straight to our Patreon page, or go to patreon.com and look for the D6 Generation. You'll find us there. It'll explain the whole thing. You can become part of the show, support us in what we're doing. It's all great fun, and we got all kinds of plans for the Patreons in this new year.
Excellent. So, Craig, what's the time now for?
It's time for achievements in gaming.
It is. And, of course, Achievements in Gaming brought to us by all our fine friends over there at Patreon. And, the achievement noise is back, Craig. There it is right there. It's back. It's hearing.
I heard it not.
Well, it doesn't go through Skype. There's the Skype buffer that prevents. Yes, but it's back.
Interesting theory.
And when you hear the achievement noise, do not freak out. It's not an audio error. It's not an artifact or mistake. It's just there to remind folks that something occurred worthy of note, much like it does on the Xbox. So that's the
worthy of note.
Yes. So
that's a high bar to live up to.
It's really not
worthy
that high. So let's talk about first any kind of games you've been playing. Crstal, what have you been playing lately?
Well, I actually recently was at MeepleCon here in Las Vegas, which I guess I'm kind of biased about because I help run the convention. So nice. I really enjoy it. But I did get to play a few games when I wasn't actually working. And I played some new ones that have just come out recently. I'm generally a fan of lighter games when I'm at a convention because I like to try and play with lots of different people. So a few of the games that I played that I really liked, King Domino, which just came out recently, was one of my new favorites, and I bought it almost instantly after I played it the first time.
Is this a take on dominoes or totally different?
So the tiles are domino-like in that they have two different squares on them that are connected, but you use them to build not really area control, but you build a little kingdom in front of you and you score points based on the way you place the tiles. So it's not really like dominoes, but it's quick, it's easy. It literally takes 15 minutes to play. And the tiles are nice and chunky. I like good components, and they are definitely nice. It actually kind of looks like a kid's game at first glance, which turned me off initially, but the gameplay is pretty strategic for it being only a 15-minute game. So I really enjoyed that.
Great.
And then I also got to play... I'm not big on abstract strategy games, but Z Garcia from the Dice Tower, a lot of the guys from the Dice Tower came to MeepleCon for the second time this year, and Z taught me and a couple of my friends Element, which is a new abstract strategy game from Rather Dashing Games.
Nice.
And it's actually plays best with 4 players, which is pretty unique for an abstract strategy game. So that one was kind of cool. You control the little pieces that represent the 4 elements: wind, fire, water, and earth. And you have to trap the pawn of the player to your right and try and avoid being trapped by the player on your left. So you're constantly moving your pawn and using the elements to try and trap one of the other pawns, and it's really strategic, but there's a little bit of luck, which I kind of like, in that you're drawing the tiles out of a bag, the little pieces for the elements.
That sounds cool. I like the idea of a 4-player abstract game. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, it kind of fixed the problem that I tend to have with abstract strategy games, in that I game because I like the social aspect of it. Right. And when you play a 2-player abstract game, since there's always one person thinking and focused on their turn, there isn't much of a social aspect. So with the 4-player game, it solved that.
Nice. What else is on your list there?
So I technically didn't play this at MeepleCon. I played this after MeepleCon, but I got to play Roll Player, spelled ROLL, which is a pretty hot new game where it actually gamifies the character creation aspect of an RPG.
Ooh, that sounds
and
cool.
turns it into a board game.
Neat. So are you trying to create the best character you can? Fastest?
Yeah, so everyone gets dealt a race and a class and like a little bit of a backstory, and then you have specific goals that you're trying to hit for each of your traits, and you use dice manipulation and placement to try and make sure that you hit the exact goals. So some of them are like you have to hit 14 plus, so anything above 14 will work, whereas others are more specific, like it has to be a 15 or a 16 and that's it. And you buy equipment just like you were beefing up a character to head into an RPG, and those will give you in-game victory points. It is tons of fun. It's kind of hard to find online right now, but I'm definitely going to be adding it to my collection once I can find a copy of it.
I think my kids would love that because they're big D&D players, so I think that sounds like something that would really be a sweet spot for them. I'll have to take a look. Do you think it would resonate well with younger players?
I think it would, depending on the age. I don't think it would work with maybe really young kids, but maybe older kids, like maybe 8 or 10 plus, I think would probably be able to grasp it pretty easily. It's not that difficult of a game to understand.
Perfect. That sounds cool.
Yeah. And I got to play the now modern classic Lords of Waterdeep for the very first time. It had never hit my table before. So I guess sticking with the D&D theme I got to play it, and it is just like pretty much everybody says, it is a great little worker placement game. I can see why a lot of people recommend it as a gateway game, but even me being deep in the hobby, I found a lot of enjoyment with it, and I definitely want to try it with the expansion at some point.
Yeah, every time I play Lords of Waterdeep, and I don't play it enough, every time I finish, I'm like, well, I should play this game more often. It's fantastic. It's just a really solid game.
I'm a thematic gamer. Anyone who listens to my podcast will know that. Like, sure. I generally tend to gravitate toward games with really heavy theme. And while Lords of Waterdeep's theme isn't super strong in the gameplay, I still really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're sending little D&D parties off to do things. What's wrong with that? You need to get what helps you with the theme. You need to get the D&D pulls. Have you seen those things?
Oh my gosh, I do need those.
Those kick it up a notch, because all of a sudden now your little orange cube is actually a little fighter, so that makes it all that much better.
Another game that recently hit my table for the second or third time was Clank, which I know a lot of people have been talking about, and
it's awesome. Yeah. I just got to try that out at PAX myself. I happened to be there with Tom Vassell happened to be there too, and he taught me Clank, and I was thrilled with that. I had to go off and buy it. What do you think of Clank? Do you like it?
I really like it, and I don't like a lot of deck builders, but Clank is really, really fun.
Don't tell Craig it's a deck builder.
I heard Tom mentioning his playthrough with you on his podcast. If I recall correctly, he scored 0 points, like he didn't make it out alive. Is that right?
He actually, yes, he died below the line, and I use Board Game Stats, my phone, and whenever you enter someone in Board Game Stats. For the first time on a game, it'll say personal best if it's their best score ever in your version. And so,
I remember.
I tweeted a picture of Tom Vassell showing his personal best 0 score for Clank, which I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, he got caught below the line. Now, I should say that Tom is a perfect gentleman when teaching a game, and he doesn't intentionally lose, but he does not play aggressively either when instructing. So he was very kind to myself and the other players. But it was pretty fun to watch Tom die horribly in the dungeon, I have to say.
I mean, it's kind of fun to watch just about anyone die horribly in that game, I'd say. Because it's just that moment of, are they going to get out? Are they going to get out? And then they don't.
So Clank is awesome. It's for those who haven't tried it yet, it is the theme is each player is an adventurer, right? And you're going into a dungeon, working down deeper into a dungeon to collect loot. And basically you're trying to get the most victory points to win. But the twist is that every time you pretty much do anything, you generate clank, which is essentially noise. And then periodically, when there's you draw these little noise generation tokens out of a bag, and if your colors come up, the dragon attacks and damages you, and you want to try to get back out of the dungeon with the most points to win. And if you die too deep in the dungeon, your score is 0 and you get nothing. And that's kind of what happened to Tom, right?
Yep, that sounds like what happened.
So how did you do, Crstal?
Vicious.
Have you had glorious victories when you've played, or have you had a couple rough defeats there?
What's interesting is every time I've played, I've actually made it out, and not just above ground, but completely out of the dungeon, but I still haven't won. Yeah. Somebody always nabs either the 20 or the 30 point little artifact, and I usually have been going for those, get stuck, then navigating up to a lesser one and following them out of the dungeon and losing.
Right. And
it's a lot of fun.
It's a great game, and basically the board shows you where it's a true board game, but there's also a little deck building element, and that's really how you improve your character, right? And you improve your skills as you adventure. So
yeah, and it's a good balance of the negative and positive aspects of each card. Like if it's a really good card, it's often going to give you more clank, which means that you're going to likely take more damage. So
exactly. Great. What else are you playing?
I actually recently just got introduced to the Pack-O Games series that Chris Handy does, which are their little card-based games that come in a box the size of a stick of gum. And I had kind of discounted them for a while without any real knowledge, just because I think, like some people, I thought, how much game could really be in a box that small? Especially, how has he created now, I think, nearly 20 games, all that come in boxes that small.
Wow.
Like, could they really be that different? Could they really be that good? And I am fully impressed with the 5 that I've played so far, and 4 of which I just recently played for the first time. I got to play Shh, which SHH. They're all 3-letter names, but that one's fun, kind of hard to say in an audio format. Bus, SOW, S-O-W, and Dig. And the themes are all really different. Like in Bus, each player controls a bus that's driving around a little board that's made up of these cards, and you're trying to pick up tickets, kind of like Ticket to Ride, and go from one destination to another. But it's pretty quick, simple. In Dig, you are each controlling a dog that is trying to dig up bones of different colors and then drop them off in the corresponding color dog bowl.
Yeah,
of course.
And then the artwork is adorable on that one. I like dogs, so I was kind of in on that one regardless. So was interesting because it actually utilizes a Mancala mechanic. You're moving seed packets and flowers around a kind of square-shaped board that's made up of the cards and trying to get flowers to bloom and then collect flowers based on your secretly assigned player color. So, and the art on all of the games are great. The gameplay is completely different from one to another. And obviously, being that they are, in the size of a pack of gum, these are not super deep or lengthy games. But considering their small footprint, there's a lot more there than I expected. And I was genuinely surprised. The second set that is actually, I think, just got shipped to Kickstarter backers recently, and I'm kind of bummed I didn't get in on that, so I'm going to have to pick it up after the fact.
That sounds really cool. I like the portability element, right? You can grab a bunch of those and just bring them with you when you go on to conventions or something. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, somebody on Twitter was saying, I really like, the roll and write game Quicks because it's quick and easy and it's a small box, and Chris Handy was like, well, you can fit 8 of my games in the same footprint as Quicks.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
That was really awesome. I also got to play the city building tile laying game Quadropolis for the first time.
Yeah, cool.
That one was really fun. We played on there's 2 different boards for that game, a kind of a simple one and then a more advanced one. And we played with the simple one since we had a couple new players, but it was really interesting. And it kind of reminded me, I had played the somewhat recent game Between Two Cities before, and it felt similar to that, but less, I don't know, at the end of Between Two Cities, it always felt like there was going to be a tie between players since you were controlling cities with another player on either side of you, right. Whereas in Quadropolis, you're just building your own thing. And I liked the mechanic whereby you chose tiles to add to your city. You place your pawn or one of your pieces on the side of the board, and based on the number on that piece, it determines which tile you can pick up and where you can place it in your own city. So there's a lot of strategy there in when you choose to use which of your selection tiles. Very and cool. There's some cool scoring bonuses with that one. So I enjoyed that one quite a bit. I like tile laying games, so that one was a nice light one for that.
That's a lot. Well, this is dangerous achievements because we've all been to conventions lately, so played tons of games. But this is awesome. A lot of variety there. So what was your favorite of the bunch that you played at MeepleCon? And did anyone jump out more than others?
It probably has to be King Domino for me. Yeah. Only because I guess I had kind of discounted it beforehand and did not expect much out of it. And then I just fell in love with it almost immediately. So that one was probably my favorite. And there were a bunch of others that I got to play at MeepleCon as well. Which were great. Oh my gosh, what is the name of it? The pizza game. New York Slice.
Yes.
I got to play that. It's got the cool I Split You Choose mechanism in it. That it's based on the older out of print game Piece O' Cake. Mm-hmm. That was fun. And I mean, who doesn't like pizza? So. Right. And I recently also got to play the most recently released expansion for Time Stories, Expedition Endurance. And that was a lot of fun. And I can't say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But I will say that I love Time Stories. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry.
Ooh, hey, music.
Sounds magical.
Awesome. So now you know if you hear that noise, it means Crystal's near you. Her phone is ringing.
That's right.
So
whose phone is ringing?
Now, folks who are fans of Time Stories will say that not all the stories are created equal. Where would you think that Expedition Endurance sort of fits in the quality of Time Story adventures pile?
It is, well, quality-wise, I guess I kind of think that they're all fairly on par quality-wise, but experience-wise and story-wise, there are some definite differences. but my group has had some thoughts that didn't necessarily mesh with what the general public seems to think. Like, my favorite scenario thus far has been the one that most people dislike the most, which is Under the Mask. But without spoiling anything, so nobody has to like plug their ears, I think that is partially because in all of the Time Stories scenarios, you have to make at some points some random choices about where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And my group that has been playing through all of the scenarios just chose really, really well, and really luckily when we played Under the Mask. So we just we went to the right places and we did the right things, and it just flowed so smoothly that it was a more enjoyable experience for us. And that's not to say that we haven't enjoyed the scenarios where we got stuck and we picked the wrong things, but Under the Mask also had my very favorite moment thematically and mechanically in all of the Time Stories scenarios, which, again, I can't really say, so it's kind of bad to say that, but there is a specific mechanic that they utilize in Under the Mask that when we read it and realized what we had to do to complete what they were asking us to do, I was kind of blown away by how thematic they were able to make a specific moment in the game. Awesome. And that really, it resonated with me on a deeper level. Expedition Endurance, I want to love a whole lot, but our playthrough, as a result of some things we didn't get to experience everything that scenario has to offer. So we kind of missed out on some of the best parts of it unintentionally.
Right.
And
do you ever replay them again, or is it kind of a one-shot deal for your group? You kind of once I've seen the story, I don't want to try it again.
It's a one-time deal. Once you know what you're doing in any of the Time Stories scenarios, obviously after a certain amount of time has passed, I think we could probably go back to them. But at least in short term, we played through the whole thing and we beat it. And then we were like, what are we missing here? And we looked at what would have happened. Right. Had some other stuff occurred during the course of the game, and we went, oh my gosh, that would have been so cool to experience. And we bypassed it entirely. So.
All right. Well, cool. That's impressive, Crstal. And this was all played in what, like a one con experience, one weekend. That's awesome.
That is a packed weekend.
It is.
Yeah, most of that was MeepleCon. Time Stories was a separate day, and I feel like there might have been one other game. Oh, Role Player was technically on a separate day as well. But most of the other stuff I played during MeepleCon, and that was with me attempting to actually pretend like I was working the whole time too. So
that sounds like an awesome event. So how big is MeepleCon? Is it pretty large? And it's every year, obviously. Is it a pretty big? How many folks do you guys get down there now?
It's pretty small. This was just our third year hosting the convention, and I've only been involved for years 2 and 3. Yeah. But it's about 600 people. And it's held in Las Vegas, but not on the Strip. So some people find that good, some people find that bad. And it's always the weekend immediately following the Gamma trade show.
Got it.
So we have, as Tom Vassell puts it, a inordinately large amount of vendor support for a small convention because right. Everyone's already here in Vegas for Gamma, and it's really easy to get them to just, hey, look, you already shipped all of those games in, just bring them over to MeepleCon.
and it's after Gamma, so if you have leftovers, you might as well,
Exactly. If they want to get some retail stuff sold, we will happily give you a table, and you can do that at MeepleCon. Yeah. And the vendors that we have are really wonderful. And all of our attendees are great. It is just a really fun convention, very laid back, very chill, and lots of table space for people to just sit and play games.
That sounds nice. I like the smaller conventions like that. I think those are more intimate and more relaxing.
Sounds ideal.
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's impressive, Crstal. Craig, what about yourself? What have you been playing lately?
Not nearly that much.
I know, right?
Wow. Let's see. Before we left for Adepticon, Russ and I played another game of Blood and Plunder.
Had to practice.
We had to practice. We got our first actual full naval battle in, so that was fun. That was Russ's second time working a ship and my first time working a ship. Yep. And it was the inaugural game with my new piece of terrain, which you really need to go and look at the pictures on Twitter to get a really full idea of what it was. I took a Zitterdes wreckage, which is the back half of a big galleon kind of ship that's been wrecked on this reef and little sandbar area, and I built a building on top of it. So it's A little more of that later on. So anyway, so that's
it's
cool.
a beautiful
That was
piece of
fun.
terrain, and what we did was we experimented with the scrolling rules. So for those who aren't familiar, Blood and Plunder is a miniature game, but you can have ships. And if one of your ships gets too near the edge of the board, instead of the ship going off the board and everything ending, you simply slide all the pieces on the board 6 inches to the left, let's say, so that now it's almost like the map scrolls, right? And so we promptly kept going off one side of the board and scrolled Craig's awesome piece of terrain right off the map.
Left my little island far
We just
behind.
sailed off into the sunset and left the island behind. But it looked beautiful as it sailed away.
It did.
It was
As
very
it was
nice.
moving farther and farther off to the edge.
It was wonderful.
St. Patrick's Day came and went, and we totally didn't even notice it. So if you had noticed that there was no comment about PattyCon, that's because there was no PattyCon.
Yes.
Just so much stuff going on. I completely lost track of it. And Karen did make her corned beef and cabbage, which is delicious. And we invited all of our parents over, and they all came over. So we had a really nice St. Patrick's Day dinner. And as they were coming over, Reese asked, well, what's about PattyCon? Because he remembered last year PattyCon was the first time we had a bunch of kids come over, and they were playing games too. So he kind of felt left out. So he and my father-in-law and I all played Colt Express, which is fun always. But it was interesting trying to teach Colt Express to my 78-year-old father-in-law. So
how did he like it?
He enjoys games, but he has a hard time sometimes following along with more complicated mechanisms, like, for instance, programming all of your moves for each leg of the journey.
Right.
So that was fun. And then at Adepticon, the first game we played at Adepticon was, I've been trying to get Russ to play Rogue Stars, and
this is so much fun.
Through no fault of our own, we had, in fact, the Tuesday night that we were going to play right after the big naval battle, Karen really hurt herself, and I ended up spending several hours in the emergency room with my wife. So we had to cut that short. We didn't get to play, but I packed it all so I would be able to play with Russ at Adepticon, and he was very kind to, we played the morning of Saturday, so it was really the first kind of thing we did. Rogue Stars is a miniatures agnostic science fiction rule set from Osprey, which means you can use any models that you want. And I knew I wanted to hook Russ in because Russ has the same problems I have with this whole, these miniatures agnostic. They don't have a universe in which to happen. They don't have a world in which that you're fighting an established world. And then I got to thinking, but wait a minute, there are several established worlds that I could draw upon. And I got out my Imperial Assault models, and I got out a bunch that I hadn't painted yet. And I painted a bunch of those so that I would have options. And I came up with an Imperial Cadre warband and the Rebels on Tatooine warband. So that one had Han and Luke and Obi-Wan and R2 and Chewbacca, and I couldn't quite fit C-3PO. No matter how useless I made him, point-wise, I couldn't fit him in. And then I did what I knew was going to be Russ's warband, which was Boba Fett and IG-88.
You know me
and
well.
The only other... Yeah, I know you so well. The only other bounty hunter that I have right now is Dengar, and so I
who
painted
I thought
him
was
up.
lame. I'm like, Dengar, he is the lamest of all bounty hunters.
And he's like an old man, like half a mummy.
I mean, come on. But
and then Dengar proceeded to headshot half of the rebels.
Headshot Luke Skywalker, one-shotted Luke Skywalker, one-shotted Chewbacca. It was awesome, right in the head both times.
It was crazy.
Boom,
it
boom.
was such bad rolling on my part.
Dengar is the man. Just saying.
Yeah. So I think I speak for both of us when I say we really enjoyed the Rogue Stars rule set.
It was a lot of fun. It's a great way. So it's kind of like Frostgrave for sci-fi, right? It's like this.
Right.
But what's brilliant about it is you have these cool models you might have lying around, like all the Imperial Assault models, or maybe you have, like Craig and I, some amazing Infinity models, but maybe you're not a fan of the Infinity rule set for whatever reason. You can blend them into this game, and it seems like it's got a really nice rule set for character creation, and Craig made these great cards, created all the characters, and it really, Boba Fett felt like Boba Fett. His little jetpack was working, he was flying around, he had a hand flamer, and all the characters felt right, and Craig even did a good job of making Obi-Wan feel like a Jedi. The whole thing really worked. Really worked well, and I can imagine really getting into this and trying it more. It's definitely a swingy game. It's very
it was like Frostgrave, so it's the D20s, which makes it very swingy.
It's very swingy, so this is not a tournament level game. It's just a fun, casual sort of, hey, let's put some guys on the board and see what happens sort of thing. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So that was fun. And then we demoed Eden, which is a post-apocalypse skirmish game that Russ really got wrapped up in.
Yes.
And he almost got me to buy into it. He bought the rule book so he could peruse it at night.
Yes.
And I think the game mechanics are fun. And I think the world is very intriguing, although it's got 12 factions for this little skirmish game that takes place on 2x2 foot board.
It's a French game that's only recently come to the States. So
exactly.
It's been around in France for a long time, but this is a miniature.
Yep.
And because they've been around so long, they have a wide range of models. They're very beautiful looking models, particularly the Japanese faction, and they're all metal and they're kind of you can tell they're a little fiddly to assemble, but they look really cool. I've got this new thing I've been trying to do at these miniature conventions because you go there and like every game looks awesome, right? And you kind of want to get into them all. You know you can't.
Well, they're all putting their best foot forward.
Right. So I've decided instead of buying a starter box, I buy the rule book. And then that one evening, I went and Craig and I read the rule book. And either one of two things happen. Either you get totally sucked into the fiction and the art and the different factions and the rules, and you're like, this game looks awesome. Or you start to feel buyer's remorse and think it's not great, but all you've spent is the rule book, and you haven't bought like $400 worth of models. So
they're just going to sit around and not get painted.
Yes, and in the end, it kind of felt like there were some factions in Eden I liked, but I couldn't see all of them really being my cup of tea, and the rules were looking a little more fiddly than I was hoping once I started diving into the book.
Yeah, I think the main problem for me, I can push Russ over the edge sometimes. The question is, do I want to?
Yes.
And so I watch him he buys the book and then I flip through it when he's not flipping through it. My problem with Eden, because I started to think, I could probably do this. My problem was through no fault. The gentleman who was one of the designers who gave us the demo was awesome. And the demo was neat, but it included 2 factions that I never would have chosen for myself because, as I was saying, there's 12 factions. The story is great. The world, the apocalypse that they've created is very intriguing. But then I feel like the last few factions are kind of wedged in there. Like, oh, you want aliens? We have those too. And so it's like, yeah, everything you can imagine has now happened to the Earth.
Yeah.
The 2 or 3 factions that I really felt drawn to, they had already sold out of. So that's what ultimately decided me or made the decision easier for me not to push Russ on it. So I enjoyed the demo. It's always fun when these little companies come to Adepticon or Captain Con or other small conventions and you're learning the game being taught by the designer. That's always cool. Fun. Yep. But ultimately, nothing came of that. Runewars Miniatures game we demoed. I demoed at Gen Con, but it wasn't a great experience because I was playing against a person who thought they were playing in a tournament. So they were like trying to crush me and not trying to actively make sure I didn't learn the rules I needed to know do the best I could.
I just point out, I was trying to crush you. I was just doing a bad job.
Right, you were doing a horrifically bad job.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but which interestingly enough, I have no problem with. If you're trying to crush me and you fail, I'm okay.
Right, that's okay then.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we both had fun with that.
More later.
I do think the demo doesn't really show the game in its best light because it's kind of like line up here, line up there, crash against each other. Which, if you're going in with kind of an open mind, you can say, oh, yeah, I can see how this is going to be cool. But if you're going in skeptical, then it doesn't give you anything more to sort of hang your hat on, which I felt like was happening with some folks who were doing the demo. But I had fun, and I think the models are cool, and I'm completely unbiased, having only written 75% of the fluff.
Well, more about that later.
Right. So that was fun. And then Russ, of course, loves his giant robots.
Who doesn't love giant manga robots beating each other up in a city?
Everybody loves giant robots.
Exactly.
Giant robots are key. They're clutch. So there was a company there doing demos of a game that they had just kickstarted called Giga Robo.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that, in which Russ got all of his payback back and more.
Oh, yeah, I crushed you. It was great.
Yeah, it was an utter and complete crush.
But it was a solid...
So it was a butt kicking.
This is like Monster Apocalypse is back pretty much, but it's giant robots. But very similar concept in that they're producing really cool plastic miniatures, not blind purchase, so thank goodness.
Thank God.
Really cool plastic miniatures along with either paper or hard plastic buildings, depending the level you back the Kickstarter, on a little board.
Yeah,
so it's a pretty.
The two guys doing the demos were having a little competition, and they were a little confused over what set came with the plastic buildings, which looked beautiful.
Really interesting mechanics, and I'm getting into this idea. There's this new mechanic now. I'm starting to see, Craig. I feel like it just jumped out and said hello to me at Adepticon this year, and I think they should do it in board games more. But I'm starting to see it in miniature games, and we saw it in Rogue Star, and we saw it in Giga Robo. It's this idea that you can interrupt your opponent in the middle of their action, and it's always kind of been there, but it's a core mechanic in these games now, where literally it's like I'm shooting you, and it's okay, I'm shooting you at the same time, and the core mechanics indicate which hits first, and it's really it's a key component of the game as opposed to like an interrupt an Overwatch shot.
In Rogue Stars, Eden, and Giga Robo all had that mechanic,
and I really liked it. So I thought that was really interesting. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, that's good. You kicked my butt, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So I won't be buying that game. I don't buy any game that Russ kicks my butt.
Oh, fine. I'll just buy it myself. Fine.
Yeah, I was just kidding. It's not really my cup of tea, but it seemed awesome, and I really enjoyed the way the cards worked. And it was a little overwhelming that every turn your hand, your hand of cards ended up like growing by like 30 or 40 cards apparently. But that was fun and very visually sumptuous, if you will. And then literally there was 5 minutes left before they were closing the vendor hall. And all weekend long, Russ and I tried to get demos of The Other Side, the new army scale game by Weird. And the table was there, and the cards were there, the units were all set up. So clearly they were ready to do demos, but we never saw anyone giving a demo or getting a demo.
Yeah, the Weird booth was oddly kind of quiet all weekend.
It was kind of quiet. It was, and I don't know that they were wearing anything that made them readily identifiable as Weird employees, because in those last 5 minutes, a guy walked up to the table, and Bob and I were kind of standing there, and he looked mainly like he was, just another con goer, except he had a vendor badge. So there was no big shirt that would clearly identify him. And I was like, do you work here? And he was like, yeah. And I said, I know that it's running super late, but could you just give me a really quick demo? And he was like, well, it's got to be really quick. So it was really quick. So it was more of an explanation of the game rather than a demo. But I was intrigued, and I think that they've done a great job if you like Malifaux and you enjoy that card-driven aspect, because that's what it is. I didn't see any dice. I don't think there's any dice. I think it's all cards. It's mainly, if you think of Malifaux and then blow it out so that each model becomes a unit of models, but they're still you're attacking one unit versus one unit, so those cards are still the same. So the cards are going to be, if you hit, you can cheat if you've got the cards, and there's a mechanic where you don't always have a full hand of cards. You've got to actually generate your cards by the stats on your models. So you can cheat that to bump the total up higher, and then your damage is another flip. So it's very similar to Malifaux. The models were gorgeous. They were painted incredibly well. If you saw pictures from Adepticon, you might have been turned off a little bit by the trays that they're on. Are actually round trays, so they're round models on round bases, and the round bases are on round trays, and they were very thick. They were like an inch thick on the demo table. But what the gentleman who gave us the demo was telling me was they actually had shrunk those down quite a bit, so they're going to be much thinner. So that was interesting. It was, again, not my cup of tea, but I think that those people who are back to the Kickstarter the hilt and they're super weird fanboys are going to be happy with the product that was created. And then Board Game Night was really weird this year because I don't think neither Russ nor myself got to play any games.
Right.
So usually we get to play all kinds of games. And this year we were doing prize giveaways, and we were there were a couple people we were kind of holding out, hoping to see that we could then play a game with that we were all set and ready to play with. And so I got to teach three of my favorites. I got to teach Colt Express to a bunch of listeners, Hex to a different bunch of listeners, and then The Resistance to a different bunch of listeners. So those are all some of my favorite games. So that was fun. So I got to sit in on a couple turns of each of those. But the game night was hopping again. I think at the height of it, we probably had maybe 50 or 60 people. And it slowly ramps up to that, and then it slowly fades after that. And we had to kick everybody out at 12:30 because we were passing out exhausted. But it was a lot of fun. Adepticon, I'm sure we'll talk more about Adepticon in another episode soon. whenever all that sort of settles out. But that's my gameplay. Russ, what about you?
Well, I got to be really short here, but fortunately, between Crstal and Craig, we covered most of the things I played. So we talked about Clank, we talked about Blood and Plunder. Risk Legacy, so listeners will know that I've been playing Risk Legacy with my family now for the better part of a year, and we played again last weekend. And again, my youngest daughter has won yet again. And my oldest daughter, doing the math here, we're now on game, I believe it is 9, and I believe my youngest daughter has won all but 3. So mathematically, I think if she wins one more, I think it's impossible for anyone else to win the world.
Wow.
So she is. So now
Good for her.
Well, yes, and the thing is, she plays the cuteness card continually on my wife and my oldest daughter. So whenever she's winning, I keep trying to turn the table against her, but no one will ever follow the dad. It's always like, kill dad, don't worry about it. And so she is always victorious, basically due to incredibly good political power is essentially what happens there. So good times there. Played, we talked about Adepticon, everything. The only thing we didn't mention I did at Adepticon was I did manage to play War Machine with Menoth John from Painting with Menoth John. So big shout out to our friends at Painting with Menoth John. John and I have spoken many times about playing War Machine together, and we did. He was kind enough to take some time to play against me, even though I barely put up a struggle. But it was a great time, and it was the inaugural battle of my war wagon for my Trollbloods, and they had a great time. So that was a lot of fun.
We didn't mention Artemis.
And we also played Artemis, yes. And John had said, hey, I got a couple of tickets to Artemis. You guys want in? And so we played Artemis. Awesome. Crstal, have you ever played Artemis before? Are you familiar with what that is?
I have not.
So Artemis is something you can see at conventions, usually a Gen Con. It's at Adepticon. I think it goes several other conventions. But essentially, they've got a giant, fully computerized bridge simulator, like you're on the bridge of the Enterprise, right? So of a starship. And each person...
Okay, well, you have my attention already.
Yes, each person takes a station. So Craig was on the communication station. I was at the helm. One player is on scanners. One player is on engineering. And then one player is on weapons. And then the last player is the captain. The captain actually has no station, but there's a large viewer screen up on the wall as well. And he'll say things like, put tactical up. And one of you has to hit the tactical button. And then, you know, the captain will say, give me a course towards Starbase 3. And the scanner guy will figure it out and yell, course 93, sir. And then set a course helm. And I got to set the course. And meanwhile, Craig's trying to get the Starbase to do things. And it definitely takes really, really good coordination, but it really gives you the feeling of being a Starship Commander. If you're ever at a convention and you see Artemis, it is well worth the $5 to give it a try. It was oh
my gosh, at $5. Yeah, that sounds
I know, right?
Amazing.
It's awesome. And you get about an hour.
If I could live out my Star Trek captain dreams, are you kidding me? That sounds amazing.
Totally should do it. Definitely get a crew. I mean, it's always fun. You can go in as a random person and just get a random crew, but it's much better if you go in with friends. And kind of because you'll have stories to last a lifetime because of the continual mistakes everyone makes gets really hilarious. So a lot of fun. It's a good time.
A few years ago when they closed the Star Trek experience here in Las Vegas, they sold off a bunch of the assets from it and some of the things that they had collected. And a friend of mine purchased an old uniform that was originally used in the filming of Star Trek First Contact, and he let me try it on. So I actually got to wear a uniform.
That's
and it was
awesome.
The best ever.
That is so cool. That's fantastic. Yeah, I was really sad when I finally got to Vegas. They just closed the experience. It was a few years ago, and I was like, oh man.
Yeah, they closed it back in I think 2008. It was literally closed just right after I moved to Las Vegas. So I got to go experience it when I first came out here, and then they closed it. And I was hoping they were going to reopen it, and they talked about doing it for a few years, but that kind of faded away after a while.
That's a shame. So, that's a lot of gaming because of all these cons. Craig, let's do modeling real short. So, what have you been modeling lately? Because Crstal, do you do any miniature gaming at all? Any painting or anything?
I do not. I've toyed with the idea of getting into it, but time is obviously short for many gamers, and I don't think that I have necessarily the patience required to do. I would really want to do painting right, and I don't know if I have the patience to actually really do it well.
It is.
It's very time.
It is a lot of work. So speaking of lots of time, Craig. So. Yes. Real quick, what have you been painting lately?
Yes, I get it, Russ. I get it. Okay, no more. You don't need to throw any more signals my way. Go to my Twitter feed and check out the wreckage of the Black Revenge because that's an awesome piece. I shamelessly stole an idea from a person online called Thomarillion. So you could probably link to that as well. That's really cool. And I painted a bunch of Imperial Assault minis, including Obi-Wan, Dengar, Leia, and I think 6 or 7 others. And that's all I got. What about you, Russ? If you're not fast, I'm going to say something mean.
No, I've done no painting whatsoever, so we can skip right on to other, which is any geeky gaming goodness, like any books you've read or shows you've been watching or comic books. So, Crstal, how about that? Or video games also fall into this category.
All of my free time, just about every waking moment that I'm not at work, sleeping, or playing board games has been spent over the past couple of weeks playing the new Zelda game, Breath of the Wild.
Ooh.
I am in love with it. We got the copy for the Wii U. We didn't buy a Nintendo Switch, although I will probably buy a Switch at some point. This is, for me, hands down the best Zelda game ever created, and truthfully, and it's hard to say this because there are some video games that I have really loved over the course of my life, but it might be the best video game I've ever played.
Wow, wow. So what is so compelling about it?
And I do say that knowing how big of a statement that is.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So, and you're not the first, by the way. It's like one of the highest rated games ever. It's obviously doing very well by critics and obviously gamers alike. What can you summarize? Like, what makes it so amazing? Is what's really the key differentiator here from other Zelda games or other open world games?
I think the fact that they've made it an open world game is where they have allowed the Zelda story to really shine. Whereas they remade A Link to the Past for the 3DS, not just a few years ago, and they Link Between Worlds was the name of the remake. And in that one, you didn't have to do the dungeons in order, but unfortunately, it wasn't as good because the difficulty had to be scaled down on basically every dungeon since you could do them in any order. And I worried that in this game, since it's open world and you can kind of do stuff in any order, that it might suffer from the same problem. But they do a really good job of giving you almost all of the tools that you'll need to complete what they call shrines within the course of the game. Like right from the get-go. They give you have, bombs aren't an item that you have to acquire. It's a rune ability that you can just activate at any time, and you can toss 2 different types of bombs literally anytime you want. And there are a bunch of other runes that give you powers like magnesis and turning water into ice and other things like that.
Cool.
And you use those abilities in fun and creative ways. So it's puzzle solving, not really like Portal, obviously, but for people who like games like Portal, there's a really fun puzzle-solving aspect of a bunch of the shrines. The open world has item crafting, which Zelda games typically don't really have in any real degree. You can cook, you can upgrade your items and your weapons and your armor, which definitely is more in the vein of, say, like Skyrim or Fallout or those types of games. So I think it takes aspects that are really good from a lot of modern video games, and it puts them into a Zelda story that is both interesting and compelling, even if people can't figure out where on the Zelda timeline this one fits in, because that's a thing that the internet has to try and do.
Right, of course they do, right.
But it is, and it's just fun in a way that Zelda games often aren't. Like, they don't pigeonhole you into doing specific things. Like, if you see a mountain over there, you can literally just walk over and climb up it. Oh, wow. You can climb things. The fact that you can climb things sounds so simple, but it's kind of novel. Like, you can go anywhere pretty much any time, and you can just explore. I've completed a vast majority of the game and have just been now wandering around completing side quests because I can. And I literally will just find an area of the map where I haven't uncovered a lot of stuff, and I'll just start walking around. I'll climb trees. I'll climb up a mountainside and see what I find, and I'll stumble across random characters just wandering out in the wild. I think one of the other things that's really cool about this game is they have a lot of randomness programmed in that kind of gives it a more charm than you would expect. Like in a Zelda game, typically, especially older ones, usually the enemies are kind of pre-programmed to move in specific ways, and generally what they're going to do. So the first time that you get into a fight with a really big monster, and he then, to attack you, looks around, sees a smaller monster next to him, picks up said smaller monster, and hurls him at you. Like that's a moment that I wasn't expecting. And they do seem to, it almost feels like they're improvising in any given moment in a way that I've never seen in a Zelda game before. So you don't always know what's coming, and that makes it more interesting, especially in like battles and stuff like that. But it's not super difficult. I love video games, but I'm not a hardcore gamer when it comes to video games by any means, especially nowadays, because board games are more of my focus. But Zelda has been amazing. I love it.
Oh, very cool. Now you get me excited to try it. And I played Zelda, the very first Zelda, and I haven't really played a Zelda game since. And this is the first one that I've heard so much about. I'm like, oh, can I really miss out on that one? It sounds really good. But it also sounds like a lot of hours.
This is a game for just about everybody.
Now, how many hours have you sunk into this, or do you want to admit that?
I honestly have no idea. That's what's funny is we've had the game now for, I think it's been out for about 2.5, maybe 3.5 weeks. And I have, any evening that I've been at home and haven't had other things that I had to do, I've been playing Zelda. Wow. So it's been a lot of my time. I'm kind of glad that MeepleCon came up and some other things came up, because there are days where I'm like, oh my God, I've been playing Zelda for 8 hours. I need to go see the sun for a moment.
See, the Switch could be bad, because then you'd have taken it to MeepleCon and maybe just sat in the corner and switched out all day.
I thought about that. I was like, man, if I have to sit at the registration table all day, I kind of wish I had a Switch, because then I could just play Zelda. Danger.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it. That does sound really, really cool. How about you, Craig? What have you been doing for books and movies and things?
TV, Iron Fist. I'm enjoying it, although I don't think I enjoy it quite as much as the other Marvel TV shows. Mm-hmm. I do enjoy it. And Black Sails is doing a great job, because it's the last season, and but they're kind of being brutal. And I'm still watching APB, which I need Russ to watch to tell me if the engineering and stuff is fun and cool and interesting and even remotely plausible, or if it's just a bunch of gobbledygook and I'm just buying it because I'm technically an idiot.
All right. Well, you sold me. I'm going to go check it out now. When we were on
you got to check it out anyway. Right. On the plane, I almost got a chance to watch Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, but then we landed and none of other planes had any entertainment on them whatsoever, so that was sad. I'm re-listening to the Witcher audiobooks, getting ready for the new one, so that's exciting. And because Russ is watching the TV show, I reread the Dirk Gently novels and then remembered promptly why I hadn't reread them before now.
So not a fan,
I don't think
apparently.
It's his best. I didn't really enjoy it. The end of Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul in particular was painful to me.
Well, watch the show.
So that's me. What about you, Russ?
Well, real quick, a couple things I should mention. Did do a couple panels at PAX. I wanted to thank Matt, the organizer, did a fantastic job. The first panel was the Choosing a Board Game panel. I had folks from all across the spectrum on it. It was really had a lot of great turnout, so thank you for everyone who came to that. And then later I got to play on a Wits and Wagers panel with 4 teams of different folks who were either in the quote-unquote media, the board game media, if you will, which I guess we qualify for apparently, as well as there were 3 other teams that were related to game designers or to gaming companies. And Tom Vassell, I've been hanging out with him a lot apparently. Tom Vassell again was running this thing, and it was awesome. He did a giant Wits and Wagers game. Craig, we totally need to steal this idea for our Gen Con event. It's brilliant. I
like it.
So I think we should
I feel like I was kind of almost there with you, because he brought the exact same Wits and Wagers game that he did for you guys at PAX East, and he did the exact same game with the same questions at MeepleCon in Las Vegas.
Was
so
it
I got
fun?
to play in the same game.
Was it fun? Right? It was awesome.
Oh my gosh. So much fun. And I'd heard on their live streams about them doing it at Dice Tower Con in the past, but man, that is a lot of fun.
It's a great idea. So nice job, Tom. It was a blast. I'm in the last book of the Pillars of Reality series, really enjoying that. In the video game front, Crstal, I'm playing Horizon New Dawn on the PS4 and really, really enjoying that game. Completely different open world game, but very cool. I'm enjoying it so much, and for long-time listeners will appreciate the sacrifice I am making. I'm enjoying this so much. While I own a copy of the new Mass Effect, I have not started it yet. I haven't even started. I haven't even watched the intro video, even though I am the biggest Mass Effect fan on the planet, because I'm really enjoying New Dawn and I want to finish it. It's kind of like reading 2 books at the same time. I don't like to do that. So I really want to finish.
I get that.
Yeah, I really want to finish New Dawn. I'm probably about 80% through, so it's not that much farther. Plus, early reports, there's a lot of bugs in Mass Effect, so it probably is not a bad idea to wait for the first patch. So anyway, also enjoying Iron Fist, as Craig mentioned. A lot of hate on the internet. I'm really having fun with this. I don't know what that's about. But I will say this. we do have a strict no hate policy on this show. So I will not throw any hate here, but I will say, it seems like any TV show that's been on long enough eventually has to have the obligatory musical episode.
I hate that.
And so
that is such a cliche. To me, that feels like a part of my culture that I actively dislike.
So I was cute back when Joss Whedon started doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer back in the day. It was cute then,
Yeah.
There's been other
cute when it was first done.
There's been other semi-cute attempts throughout history, but the one they felt the need to have a Supergirl Flash crossover musical episode, and in the beginning, I was like, oh, cute. They're letting the actors and actresses actually sing. They're not really using, real singers and voice and lip syncing. They're actually, oh, God, none of them can carry a tune in a bucket. This is not good. It was not good. And my oldest daughter is in chorus. And so she's like, ooh, that's a show. Ooh, he's flat there. Ooh, she's like, I don't think I can listen to this. It was really, really kind of awful. So the crossover Supergirl Flash, the Music Meister, I think, is the villain's name, which must be from one of the really bad DC comics. I don't know, but anyway, no hate, just very, very disappointed in that whole situation, really there. So, whew, that is a lot of achievements. Is that achievements, everybody?
That was an achievements palooza.
Did we miss anything, Crstal?
I don't think we missed any paloozas. We're good with the paloozas.
No paloozas were missed or harmed in this episode. And now, in an attempt to bring a small amount of dignity and decorum to this otherwise base form of entertainment, and I use the term loosely, I am proud to present... Oh, get on with it. It's time for App of the Ep. Seriously, Wakeland, I used to have my own segment. Now I'm relegating to announcing this pap. Hey, you're lucky we still use you. Howdy, everyone. Welcome to another App of the Ep. This time around, I found a great new app. I'm actually really impressed by this one. Thanks to one of our listeners on Twitter. Unfortunately, I feel really bad. I've forgotten your Twitter handle, sir, but retweet me. But he tweeted me and said, "Hey, I just did all the writing on this new game. You might enjoy it. It's called Ticket to Earth." So I downloaded it. The full app name on iOS is Ticket to Earth Episode 1 Uprising. Really, really enjoying this game. It's sort of a little, I guess the best way to describe it is sort of an RPG adventure game in sort of a dystopian sci-fi world. And I don't know if it's dystopian. Well, it's becoming dystopian, I suppose. And what's really cool about it is it's basically you eventually end up controlling a couple characters, but initially you're controlling one person, and she can you're fighting little robots and bugs and other creatures on a grid. But what's interesting about the grid is it's done in patterns. So it's kind of like one of those games where it's an adventure game and a fighting game and an RPG, but it's kind of using an abstract game at the same time. But unlike sort of the games that are like that, but like Puzzle Quest, where you're basically doing Bejeweled, it's not like that, but more you're on the grid. There's different icons. And by taking certain paths to approach the monsters or creatures along the certain color combinations of the icons, not only do you get to travel farther, but you build up powers that then allow you to do really cool things to your opponents. So maybe it gives you a range attack. Maybe it gives you a flaming sword that causes him to catch fire. Maybe you can stun him. And so you're trying to figure out the best way to avoid being attacked by other enemies, so escape too many of them, fight another one, and still power up your stuff at the same time. What really makes the whole thing work is the great music, the great written dialogue. The listener who sent me this information, good job writing it. I think I really am compelled. The interesting characters, the art style is fantastic, and there's a pretty compelling story happening at the same time where you're doing these little battles. And there's, it feels like a little pretty interesting little semi-open world game where there's side quests and primary quests. Different characters to develop. Really, really enjoying it, and I think the combat mechanics are very unique and really work well on a phone. What I really like about it, I think it costs $3.99 or $4, but it's not paid up. It's not a freemium game. You pay once, you get the complete game unlocked, Really a lot of fun here. I can't recommend it highly enough. It just feels right. The graphics are great. Again, that story's compelling. And I really, really like the gameplay. Even though it's abstract, it still feels cool. And you're fighting yourself really. Sometimes it gets a little tough, but when you win one of these battles, you really feel good about it. It makes you feel like you really accomplished something. And I really like how it can be done in bite-sized time slices. So one battle doesn't take that long, and you can just put the game down again. So very handy when you're traveling. But also, I spent an entire a couple-hour flight back from Adepticon. Just didn't even know the flight went by. Just started playing the game, my headphones, and boom, all of a sudden, before I knew it, we were landing. And I just blew away 2 hours having a great time with Ticket to Earth. Check it out on iOS today. Thank you for listening to another scintillating edition of App of the App, a segment in which, hey, less of that, more just getting on with the show. Seriously, Wakeland, you are like school in summer. No class. Hey, welcome back. And now, since we have Crstal on the show, Crstal, thanks again for being on the show with us. You really appreciate it. We thought we'd ask Crstal all about her podcast and what got her into podcasting and gaming. Her podcast, of course, is Boardgame Blitz. But Crstal, first, we ask all of our first-time third chairs this question, so please don't be offended. But are you now, or have you ever been, a gamer?
I most definitively have and am currently a gamer.
Excellent. Now, what games got you started? What was your youngest age where you played your first game that's kind of beyond sort of the monopolies and checkers and chess? When did you play your first real gamery game, as it were?
I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what you define as gamery, because I did play some of the slightly more gamery things when I was young. I actually still own a copy of the Omega Virus, which was one of the it's a Milton Bradley title from the early 90s, and it's got a squawk box in it, but there's a little bit more strategy in it than most games of that era. But truthfully, my modern board gaming started in 2007 when I still lived in the Kansas City area. A friend of mine invited me over to game night and taught me titles like Betrayal at House on the Hill and St. Petersburg.
Yeah,
and
nice.
Runebound 2nd Edition was kind of the one that
very nice. Runebound.
blew my mind.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I'm so excited that got reprinted about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Now I own the 3rd edition of Runebound.
Nice. A Runebound fan. That's awesome. I love that universe. In fact, later this episode, I think we're going to try to talk about Rune Wars, and that might be interesting to talk about more. So awesome, Crstal. So the rest, as they say, is history. You just kept gaming ever since then?
I moved to Las Vegas in 2008 and didn't really have a collection of my own. And just slowly over the past few years, I started accumulating my own collection and started going to board game meetups here in the Las Vegas area, and really dove in hardcore probably around 2 or 3 years ago now. And then it's all history from there for sure.
Nice.
Podcast, and I help run a convention.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I've written content for a bunch of websites, so I do a lot of it.
I love it. So kind of a reasonably recent convert to or discoverer of board games. Then you just dove in with both feet and went all in. I mean, doing everything you possibly can.
It's only been 10 years really for the modern board games for me. Yes. But as far as owning and really playing on a weekly basis, it's been probably about 3 years now.
Wow, that's hardcore. I love it. I love the commitment. That's fantastic. So now, when you got into the board gaming thing, have you always pretty much stayed in the board game realm? Have you ever ventured over into role playing games or into miniature gaming, or you pretty much stay with the board game universe?
I've pretty much stayed just with board games.
Okay.
I've tried a couple of smaller, one-off scenarios of D&D, and I actually really enjoy it, but I've been weirdly scared to dip into RPGs more because I think that I will like them so much, and I don't have enough time to devote to board games and RPGs. So there are a couple of one-time scenario RPGs that I'm really interested in trying that I haven't gotten a chance to yet, but for me, it's mostly just board games.
That's good to stay focused. Although, Craig and I are not. So that's part of our problem.
Right, you guys are all over the place.
We really are. It's embarrassing, quite frankly. But
it's sort of ridiculous.
So let me ask you this: so you guys, Crstal, you and your two co-hosts there, you decided how did you decide? When did you wake up one day and go from kind of board game fanatic, I guess is the right way, or passionate board gamer, and decide, I want to run a convention, I want to do a podcast, I want I want to do more with the community than just play board games in that community. How did that sort of come about?
I think for me personally, when I really dove into the hobby like 3 years ago and I started consuming other board game content, I developed a deep appreciation for the people who were putting that content out. And I really wanted to give back to the hobby in a meaningful way. So I started looking for ways to do that. And originally I wrote just some board game articles for some smaller websites that did like nerdy type content. And then on Reddit, on the board game subreddit in the summer of 2015, somebody posted a thread asking what's missing in board game podcasts. And a bunch of people said two things multiple times: that there weren't enough women and that there weren't enough short-length podcasts, which I'm sure you guys are intimately familiar with.
And we don't help with the short-length thing at all. We are in no way contributing to that. That's right.
And myself and Ambi and Cassidy, my two co-hosts, had never met or spoken to one another before. And we all responded within that same thread saying, hey, I could do that. And we decided to start talking on Facebook and get to know each other. Cassidy was pregnant with her daughter at the time, so we kind of gave it a little time to marinate and see if we really wanted to do it. And in May of 2016, we released our first episode.
That is fantastic. First of all, I can't believe that an expectant mother just decided to jump into podcasting with both feet.
That's
awesome.
Courageous.
That is courageous. Being both parents ourselves, we understand the level of commitment going on in all those things. But that's awesome. And I was really fascinated to hear about that, Crstal, because, and I don't know if all listeners know this, but of course, Boardgame Blitz is part of the Dice Tower Network, as are we. And so when you guys showed up on it, I started listening, and I love your podcast. I think it's fantastic. I love the energy. We'll talk more about the format in a minute. I really think it's great. But I noticed on your show that none of you had met, and it was only in a recent episode. You said we were all going to meet up for the first time after doing it for, about 6 or 8 months now.
Yeah, we're about 10 months in episode releasing wise, and we've been speaking to one another now for more than a year and a half, because it was August of 2015 when we first started talking, and we just met literally a week and a half ago, as of the time of this recording, in person for the first time.
That is awesome, right? That's fantastic. Wow. So, and now, when you, what did you think when you first started thinking about, okay, we're going to do this podcast, and these two women I've never met before, I'm going to do this with them. How did you become confident this was going to work? I mean, how did you kind of approach? I know you kind of met on the chat. How did you make this happen, or did they make it happen? Who kind of drove it?
And it's not a criticism of either Ambi or Cassidy, because at the time they were strangers for all intents and purposes. But as we were talking and planning and getting ready to do things, all I could think was, what if we have absolutely no chemistry? Right. And what if we have different tastes in games? What if that doesn't work and we can't have a conversation? And oh gosh, no one's going to listen. No one's going to like this. And I was like, you know what? I don't care. We're doing it anyway. And we decided that we were going to have fun with it, and it has worked like gangbusters. I can't even, and of course, Ambi and Cassidy are the most wonderful women in the world. I'm so happy to call them friends now. But truthfully, we had no idea if it was going to work or not, and we just decided to do it anyway.
That's fantastic. I think that is so awesome, because most podcasts, including our own, start off with a group of local friends who are just like, we'll just talk on the microphone and see if anybody cares, So I think it's fantastic that you guys sort of did this. It just blows me away. They just met people you never met before online, just started chatting with them. So let's just try this crazy thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, and the first couple episodes, you can tell if you listen to the first, I think 2 or 3 maybe, are a little more awkward, because we were Skyping with each other to record, and we weren't using video when we were Skyping, so we couldn't have that natural, like when you're in the same room with someone, you can use the visual cues to know when to start talking. Right. And we didn't have the ability to do that. So when we started doing video Skyping with each other, it got way more natural.
That's awesome. And I noticed that too. One of the things I like to do when I discover a podcast for the first time, I'm sad to say I did not listen to you from the very beginning. I only recently discovered you guys about December, but I went back and listened to the first episode, and I was really impressed with the quality, the audio quality, and how you guys pulled off that first episode, because it can be, that first one's very hard, nerves, everything else, but it really, so I thought the first one was really, really great. But you listen like maybe 10 episodes later or so, or maybe just 5 or 6, and the quality, you can tell you guys really learned and improved very rapidly, to the point where It sounds like by episode 10 or so, it sounds like you've been doing it for years. You sound great. It really comes across.
We quickly realized that we had to get rid of the ums and the uhs, and we're still working on getting rid of the word like. We say that a little more often than we would enjoy.
Yeah.
And I just said, now I'm noticing that I'm doing
See, don't think about it. It makes it worse.
Don't worry about it.
Every time.
Don't think of pink elephants either.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah,
Thanks, Craig.
no pink elephants.
Oh, geez, there you go.
There it is. So how did you guys come up with a format? It sounds like based on that thread, you were thinking, well, we'll be all women. So that's one thing. How did you said let's just go all in and be short? Also, was that part of the basic concept?
We wanted something that people would be able to consume easily on their daily commute, whether that's in their car or on public transportation or wherever else. And we know that some people have a very long commute, but often I think people's commutes tend to run probably in the 30-minute range. So we said, okay, all of our episodes are going to be 30 minutes or less, and we have stuck to that. I feel like technically the bloopers at the end of our episodes have pushed us into the 31-minute range a couple of times, but if people want to complain that the extra little bloopers at the end push us over, I figure, that's not that big of a deal.
Unofficial content does not count. I think you're fine.
Right.
That's awesome. So what else went into the thinking of the format? So you were thinking, okay, it's going to be short. What else did you think about? How did you guys decide you wanted to differentiate?
Well, we, as gamers, are very different people. We have different tastes in games and the type of games that we play regularly. And so we knew that we couldn't go in like some podcasts do and have a singular review of a single game every episode, because we aren't playing games together and we're often not playing the same games.
Right.
So we said, we kind of enjoy hearing other podcasters talk about what they've been playing lately. Not necessarily a deep review of something, but just what's been hitting their table and what their initial thoughts were about it, or if it's something they've been playing for a long time, what their long-term thoughts are on it. So we'd said, okay, at the beginning of every episode, we'll each talk about a game that we've played recently, kind of give a brief synopsis of it, but then just give our quick thoughts. And then we move into usually a thematic discussion based on the episode's theme. We pick a different theme for every episode, and they have varied pretty widely over the course of the past year. Everything from games that are related to the word hot or heat in general, like, desert games, stuff like that. Conventions and what, some tips and tricks are to do to handle a board game convention. We talked about Jen Kant last summer. Suzanne Sheldon, who is fairly well known in the board game media industry, came on as a guest. She was actually our first guest on the podcast, and it was only like episode 6. So we were so grateful to have her come on and kind of give us a little bit of credibility early on. But yeah, we talk about some games that are related to that theme, or we have a discussion related to the theme. Occasionally we throw in a accessory segment. So we talk about accessories that are helpful to make board gaming either more streamlined or more interesting or something like that. And then we wrap it up with a segment that is kind of near and dear to my heart because I am a word nerd. We have an etymology segment where we dive into the history of a word that is in some way related to gaming or board games.
That's my favorite segment. I love that bit. Now, was that your idea to just do that every time to kind of bookend the show with a concept? You start the word concept?
Yeah, it was my idea, and I honestly thought, like, I told both Ambi and Cassidy when I had the idea, I was like, okay, so this is a super nerdy thing, and I don't think anybody else is going to like it. And after a few episodes, we'll ditch it or whatever. Yeah. And it has been the segment that we've actually gotten universally positive praise about because it's something that no one else is doing. Yeah,
that's awesome. And I loved, one of my favorite episodes of yours, because I'm a big Star Trek nerd, as you mentioned, and you did a review of Star Trek Ascendancy, which I also, we've talked about and played before. And so I was like, I want to hear, because one of the things that I enjoy to see if I enjoy a podcast is what do they think of a game I like? Because if it's, if that synergy's there, then I'm going to appreciate what they talk about more. And first of all, I loved how you guys talked about it and reviewed it and went through it. And I was kind of shocked that you were explaining Star Trek to your co-host, which was sort of, made me feel old, quite frankly.
Yeah.
but I loved, you just picked the word space for your etymology. I thought that was fantastic. I just think that's just a really great little bit. And I think it really ties the show together in a very wonderful way. So nicely done. I really enjoyed that bit.
It's been really fun to try and find words that are both related to gaming and the theme that we chose that week. They haven't always been completely related, but for instance, in one of our more recent episodes, we were talking about rules in games and rule books and bad rule books and good rule books, but we had already done the etymology of the word rule back in a previous episode. Right. So I was like, okay, what do we do? I need and I was like, oh, cheat. We'll look at, if we're talking about rules, then I'll look at the etymology of the word cheat.
Love it.
So
that's awesome. So that's fantastic. So you came up with a great idea. It sounds like the co-host kind of came around at the same idea, which is great. And so, and you guys all like who? Tom Vassal and I always joke about this on the side. Was that most podcasts, one person does all the show notes every week, kind of thing. Are you who's kind of the person who has to do all the show notes every time and do all the preparation? Do you guys share pretty equally? Does one of you kind of carry that load? How does that all work out?
Well, since Cassidy is obviously busy wrangling a 1-year-old, Ambi and I have kind of taken on most of the prep work stuff. So I actually do most of the pre-recording work. So I tend to throw out ideas for episode themes and things like that. But then Ambi, goodness sake, she's the best. She does all of the post-episode work. She edits the audio and she puts together our show notes, and she and her husband update the website. So they are the absolute best, and I cannot thank her enough for being willing to do that stuff. I actually did some audio work in college, but that was quite some time ago. And while I have told her that I am definitely willing to relearn those skills and help her out, so far releasing on a bi-weekly schedule and recording 2 episodes at a time has been manageable for her. But she is just the best, and she handles a lot of that stuff. With Cassidy and I kind of supporting her. And then I handle all of our social media for the most part. Or at least I'm the most active on our social media pages. Like if you see our Twitter account saying stuff, it's usually me.
Nice. Well, shout out to Ambi there from one editor to another. Nice job. It's great. The show sounds awesome. I really like how you guys put it together. And I think it's great that you got multiple segments in a 30-minute show. I mean, Craig and I have a single segment, which is what games we played lately, and that usually is about twice the length of your entire show. So, there you go. Because we're terrible at summarizing or being brief is pretty much the problem we have.
And we're not concise in any way, shape, or form.
Never.
I'm generally not a concise person either, and I think having the time limit helps me kind of stay focused. So it's been nice because if you let me ramble, then I'm going to.
Awesome.
So.
Well, then you'll fit right in here.
That's right.
Perfect.
We can ramble all night. So that's. I mean, I love the concept of your show. So you had a great idea. You had great co-hosts. You figured it's all going to work out well. What did you guys do? I think a lot of our listeners ask us. How did you get started? How did you promote the show? How did you get out there? And as you may know, we started back in 2008. So back then, there was a lot less podcasts to compete with. It was a very different time. Now it feels like everybody and their friends got a podcast. How did you guys decide? How are you going to promote your show? How are you going to get noticed? How are you going to establish a listener base at a time when it seems like it's a very different time to launch a podcast than it was, 9 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, I can't even imagine what it would have been like 9 years ago because, podcasts were a lot newer back then, or at least not as prevalent. I think the most important part, and it was something that I still believe in incredibly strongly, is that you can't solely go onto the internet in this day and age and promote your own content and scream it into the void and expect people to respond to it unless you are supporting other content creators in some way. And so I had been actively supporting, as in listening to, tweeting at, reviewing other board game podcasts long before we started our show, because I do enjoy, like I said earlier, those content creators are who inspired me to want to do something like a podcast. So I had kind of already built up, I wouldn't call it a network, but I would imagine that if my name popped up in some people's Twitter feeds, even prior to our episodes releasing, I'm generally a stranger, but they would at least be like, oh yeah, I've seen that name before.
Right.
So when we started the show, I made sure that when we tweeted our content that we were not forcing it down people's throats, but that we were harnessing the networks that we had already built up within the board gaming community to help lift us up. And we were very, very lucky in that there are a number of shows both in the Dice Tower network and outside of it who even early on in our tenure saw that, oh my gosh, this is the first all-female hosted board game podcast. That's something cool. That's something that our hobby probably needs. And they were willing to, retweet our stuff on Twitter and share our episodes on Facebook and just give us a little bit of love early on. And that helped us grow pretty significantly. So that was incredibly helpful to us. And we could not be more appreciative of the online community that has embraced us so fully. They are the absolute best.
That's awesome. And that, that really hasn't changed. And when we started, there were some established podcasts that similarly, because we're so few, the podcasting community it was almost like a hobby club. Like, oh my God, someone else is trying this crazy new thing. We'll help them, And I guess it got a little more competitive maybe, but I still feel like that's there. And so it's great to hear that other shows are still doing that for each other. And we definitely like to help out when we can as well. I think it's great. I think you have to sort of, in the end, those of us who build these things know how much work it is. And we want to make sure anybody's going to try this gets a fair shot at it and really gets to have their voice heard. So it's great to hear that the community still does that things for each other, which is
absolutely
nice.
Yeah. And we also try to, when it fits into the conversation, I will try and give shout outs within our episodes to other podcasts that have content that relates to what we're talking about. So like, if we're talking about a discussion about women in gaming, I'll talk about the episode of Ludology where they had on Sydney Engelstein and Suzanne Sheldon and talked about that. Or if we're talking about old crappy 80s games, I'll shout out Flip the Table and stuff like that. So I try and make sure that I'm showing other content creators love because I do enjoy what they're making, and I can only hope, and generally they do, show us some love back, and it's just the best.
That's awesome. So you had sort of the strategy of sort of working in the community. You launched the show. What was the initial reaction? Were you surprised? Were you was there a lot more reaction than you expected? A little less than you'd hoped, but you kept working at it? What was how did it sort of start out for you guys?
We got a pretty good reaction early on. We had some people that reviewed us on iTunes without us, prompting. We didn't actually.
That's always nice.
Yeah, we didn't go to our brother's cousin and be like, hey, review us on iTunes. Like we just all of a sudden we were like, oh my gosh, we have iTunes reviews. And it was funny because almost all of our reviews early were 5 stars, except for one star rating. And we were like, somebody was having a bad day. Yep. But yeah, it grew pretty quickly, and it's hard to tell because when we've looked online, it seems like a lot of podcast creators don't really share metrics. Mm-hmm. So, and especially like board gaming is such a niche hobby to begin with that, like, I know the Dice Tower has talked about their episode downloads in the past, but they've been around for a very long time and they're very big at this point. So I can't gauge off of that. So we honestly, even at this point, we're not quite sure how big we are in relation to other podcasts or other board game podcasts or where we should be when we're almost a year in. But we're very, very happy with what the amount of support we got early on and the amount of growth we've seen, especially since joining the Dice Tower network.
That's
because
awesome.
That just happened now a couple of months ago.
Right.
And we've had a lot of new followers since that happened. And we just launched our Patreon page like 2 weeks ago. And we've already got, I think, 16 supporters on Patreon, which feels huge to us.
That's awesome. So head on over to Boardgame Blitz's Patreon page. Is it just go to Patreon and search for Boardgame Blitz? Are you there?
Yeah,
awesome.
It's just patreon.com/Boardgame Blitz. But seriously, you don't have to support us if you don't listen to us.
Don't be shy about asking for help.
That is success right.
Well, we're not doing it for the money, and this is definitely a hobby for us. Mm-hmm. And we, especially because we live in 3 different parts of the country, I think our biggest goal eventually with Patreon is getting enough money on the side to be able to travel more and do events together.
Yeah.
Because like what we did, a couple weeks ago when Ambi and Cassidy came to Las Vegas, where I live, for MeepleCon, that's not going to happen that often. But if we had a lot of money on Patreon, obviously that would make things like that far more doable.
Yeah, well, no one's getting rich doing podcasting except possibly Tom Vassell. I joke, he's not getting rich. But
he's definitely not.
He's definitely not getting rich.
For the love of the hobby.
He does. It's about passion, right? But our patrons have really enabled us to, Craig and I last weekend went to Adepticon, and at Adepticon in the swag bag for free, believe it or not, was a copy of Rune Wars before anybody else could get it. And now we're going to be able to talk about it this episode later, because our patrons allowed us to go there, right? And so we wouldn't be able to afford to do those kinds of things without that support. So it's not really about having lots of money to take home. It's about, experiencing the hobby even more, getting into it. And another thing I think, too, that Craig and I have discovered about Patreon in particular is you can get, thousands and thousands of downloads, and that's awesome. But when you get a certain size group of patrons who are interacting with you and actually paying you, it's not about getting the money as much as it is realizing these people genuinely appreciate you, and it starts becoming a little more, I don't know, it's even more reinforcing than just the downloads overall, and you get those occasional emails from people saying how much they appreciate the show or whatever it did for them, and it just really keeps you going. And I think that's the hardest part, because it's a lot of work. I mean, we do it for passion, but it's a lot of work, and to have that positive reinforcement from the listeners is just so powerful and keeps us going, I guess. And
absolutely. I mean, just knowing that, like, that excitement that I feel when a podcast that I love pops up in my feed, knowing that someone else possibly feels that when our podcast shows up in theirs is, I can't even describe. It's the most wonderful feeling.
It's awesome. And I think that's, and I just wanted to mention, also you mentioned earlier you joined the Dice Tower Network. That's how I discovered you, because I think it was right around January or December. I can't remember exactly, but I saw you pop in there. I'm like, ooh. And so that's fantastic. And I'm so glad that, Tom brought you in and that you're there now, because it's been that's how I discovered you. And I think a lot more people are going to discover you that way as well, which is awesome. So you launched and you got good reception, which is great. A good reception, you thought. What are some of the lessons you guys learned? I mean, what were some of the big takeaways? What weren't as expected, and what was like, well, we should have done that differently?
Well, I think we had our feet under us pretty well when we started. We had a long time to prep, because between the time we started talking about, hey, maybe we should do a podcast together, and when we launched our first episode was almost 9 months. We waited till Cassidy had her baby, and we wanted to make sure that we did our research about how to actually make a podcast and how to make it sound good, and not have that issue where when people go back to listen to episode 1, It sounds like complete crap. We didn't want that to happen. So we
sounds
we
familiar,
definitely yeah. I'm a pretty outgoing and extroverted person. So in our early episodes, I kind of feel like it's me talking more than anyone else, because I like to talk, and Ambi and Cassidy are a little more introverted, and I think they both have kind of come out of their shell as a result of the podcast. And obviously, as we've gotten to know each other, that's been easier as well, because we can have a conversation more easily, knowing each other better. But we learned that we should record in the morning and not at night, because when we record at night, we are completely loopy and we laugh too much, and we get wonderful bloopers out of it. But since Cassidy's on the East Coast, when we record at night, it's something like 5:30, 6 p.m. for me and Ambi when we start recording, but it's already 9 p.m. for Cassidy.
Right.
So
that's a great point. Our first episode, we did not succeed at not making our first episode sound bad. Our first episode was recorded on a Rock Band microphone, so that's a good story.
Amazing.
But
did you also like karaoke some Crocodile Rock?
No, but we should have. Looking back,
seems like a missed
it was a missed
now.
opportunity. Yes, definitely. Mistakes were made. We're not going to lie. What is the biggest change in how you do things since you launched?
We haven't actually changed a whole lot, truthfully.
Wow, nice.
We don't usually pick the themes for the episodes very far in advance, and that's kind of always been the case, because we do record often 2 episodes at a time, and since we record bi-weekly, since we release bi-weekly, that means sometimes we're recording an episode almost a month in advance, and so we generally try and stay away from topics that are too like board game news related, because obviously a month later, stuff that is topical might not be anymore.
Yes.
But I think we've moved more toward, some of our early episodes were, the themes were centered just around types of games, and we've moved more toward meaningful discussions that involve the hobby as a whole over time. And that's not to say we do that every week, but I think the conversations that we've had as part of those episodes have been a little bit more interesting to listen to rather than us just listing off of games that are related to the word hot, because that's not quite as interesting. But, for a 30-minute podcast, occasionally it's just fun to hear a list of games too, especially we try and mention ones that aren't necessarily as well known rather than just saying, oh yeah, Forbidden Desert, and that's it. We'll try and come up with some that are a little more
cool,
lesser known games.
For any folks out there that are thinking of starting their own podcast or just beginning out, any changes to how you edit or record, or any process changes you've made that you've learned about since you started?
We all kind of what we do is we talk via Skype, but we, in an effort to make the audio sound super buttery and good, we all record our own tracks on Audacity, which, if anyone obviously wanted to start a podcast and do it like we are over the internet, I think that is really helpful, because if you aren't sitting in front of a microphone, then the audio could be all over the place, and Skype, the quality is a little bit lower. So we all start on Skype, start our Audacity recordings, and then we all clap individually, and Ambi syncs up the claps at the beginning of the episode, and then pieces the Audacity tracks together. So that way we kind of sound like we were all sitting in the same room to some degree, and the audio quality is a little bit better. But as far as editing goes, I think it's tougher early on for a number of reasons, because you're probably not as knowledgeable necessarily about editing a podcast, and you're not as knowledgeable about speaking well. And even people who do think they know how to speak well, once you're in front of a microphone, it can be kind of intimidating. So you'll say and more often, and there'll be more awkward pauses, and editing that stuff out can be one of the more tricky aspects of audio editing. Yeah. Yes. And all of that happens all right at the beginning. So I think for people who want to start a podcast, the important part is to know that as time passes, everything will get easier. Yeah. And that even if your first few episodes are crap, that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't worth something. And if you think you have something valuable to say that people will want to listen to, you should definitely start a podcast.
Exactly. And that's very insightful. I know a lot of podcasts do that tip of recording individually, and then the editor puts them all together in Skype. We don't do that, mostly because we have a rotating third chair, and a lot of times that person is not. We've interviewed people on the phone, like they've been in the show, right. So we don't always have that luxury. So
we've interviewed each other over the phone.
In an effort, yes, exactly. So in an effort to have all of our podcasts sound equally bad, we always record centrally on one.
That's what. We're going for uniformity of
over quality, exactly,
mediocrity.
Right. But that is a very good tip.
That sounds like a good band name.
Because Eric, every time we've had like Eric Summerer on the show, I think like twice or three times, and every time he's on the show, he's like, "Okay, so I'm recording on my set." I said, "No need, Eric. You're just going to throw it away." He's like, "No." I'm like, "No, we don't do that."
I'm totally recording myself in Audacity.
See, you are. Don't just throw it away. It's fine.
No, I get paranoid.
That's probably smart. But I'm seeing your levels over here. You look lovely. It's fine.
I'm so happy that my audio levels look nice tonight.
They're very nice, very nice. What do you wish someone had told you before you started?
That is a really good question, and I think I wish someone had told me that I don't sound as ridiculous as I think I do half the time.
Well, that's a good one.
That is a good one. Actually,
I'm kind of. I think I sound ridiculous in my everyday life. I'm a little bit of a nut in general, and I think most nerds would kind of, say that about themselves, especially if they're extroverted ones like me. But a lot of the stuff that I think sounds silly or ridiculous, it does not come across like that to other people. And so I think, just learning that being yourself is okay, and that there will be people who genuinely want to hear just you, and that's it. And you don't have to fake it, and you don't have to pretend, and you don't have to be someone you're not just because you're talking into a microphone. So, and I think I've done a pretty good job of that, but I know in the early episodes, even though I am extroverted, I was definitely nervous because I didn't know how people were going to take me as a person and my voice on the internet. So I could care less. I'm me all the time. So
that's a really good one, Craig. Do you want to add any insight to that one? Because I know that bothered you for a while.
I think that's a very, very, very important note to make, because I think a lot of people do, once they start recording themselves, they feel like they have to be on. And so I know a lot of, we know a lot of podcasters, not really so much anymore, but back in the old days, that sort of created personas. Mm-hmm. And you just can't maintain that, unless you're a professional actor. That's going to eventually fade away, and it's going to give people an impression that, are you faking now, or were you faking then, or it's going to put more stress on you. And it gives the whole product that you're creating, I think, a sense of or a lack of realism that really is what I think most people are looking for when they find podcasts and they connect with podcasts and they really find somebody they really enjoy listening to. They want to feel like they know the person. We get a lot of the feedback we get is all about like, oh, you guys are kind of like my surrogate game group and things like that. And I think if we were sort of putting on a character or like over the top, like not just being ourselves, not being true to ourselves, I think that connection wouldn't be there. But also, like I said, I think main thing is it would just be hard to maintain. Eventually it's going to fall apart. And I would love to second the comment about your voice, because I have always hated the sound of my voice. I will always hate the sound of my voice. And it took me years of doing this before I just realized, well, if it was as annoying to everybody else as it is to me, they wouldn't be listening. So I just have to get over it. But that was a huge thing for me.
What's funny, and I've admitted this on our podcast before, I think I must be at least a little bit narcissistic, though, because I'll listen to our own episodes like in my car, like after they release, just to make sure everything's good and smooth and whatever. And in the podcast, I'll tell a joke or I'll say something funny or clever, and then I will laugh at myself while I'm listening to the podcast. And I'm like, that takes a really kind of special person. I'm like, man, I'm so funny. I'm
so good.
Wow, no wonder people like me. Like, it sounds horrible. And I'm like, well, that's a thing. That's who I am. And that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah. And one little nod to the, to exactly that thing, the personality and not faking your personality. So I come across as very, passionate and enthusiastic and sort of full of energy when I review a game and sort of
And he's really kind of like Eeyore.
And then what's funny is I'll run into a listener at the convention, and they'll say, so what'd you think of the new game? And I'm like, oh, it was so cool. And they're like, wow, you really are just like that in person, aren't you? I'm like, yes, I am. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I've kind of warned people in advance, like, I'm that excited and high energy, and like I'm like that all the time. And if that's not the type of person you enjoy hanging out with, then rude awakening time.
So what's been your biggest surprise now that you're a world-renowned podcast host, as it were?
Well, I think my biggest surprise is the fact that you just called me a world-renowned podcast.
Well, you are. I bet you there's people in several countries that listen to you, so you are now world-renowned. So,
true.
What was your biggest surprise?
That people wanted to listen to us, truthfully. And that's not to say that I don't value who I am or my thoughts in general, but just because there is so much content nowadays. Like, the number of... When I tell people who don't game that I have a board game podcast, they assume that we must be the only one that's doing that, because board games, what?
Right.
And obviously people in the hobby know that if you search for board game podcasts online, there is an endless supply of content, and so much of it is really good. So when we started, I was like, why in the world would anyone pick us over all of these other wonderful podcasts that have already been doing it and doing it well for years? Right. So the biggest surprise to me is that people have latched on and they have really said that they enjoy what we're doing.
That's awesome. That's fantastic, and that was our biggest surprise, was anybody downloading it. I remember the beginning.
Still is.
Look, there's been...
like when we first hit 100 downloads, and we hit 500 downloads, and then we hit 1,000 downloads. Like, my mind was just blown.
I was like, what? Exactly. I remember those moments very well. So how is and this is people ask us this question all the time, and I think it's a great question to ask. How has having a podcast impacted your hobby? Has it impacted it positively, negative? Has it no impact whatsoever? How has it impacted your view of the board gaming hobby and how you engage with it?
I think it has given me a better excuse to buy newer games, which we don't, even though we don't review games on the podcast, like as a group, I still often find, I've always kind of been to some degree in the cult of the new, wanting to try the new hotness. Right. But now I have more of an excuse. I'm like, oh, well, Pandemic Legacy just came out and I'm going to want to talk about it. Or, hey, the new Time Stories scenario came out and I want to do a spoiler episode about Time Stories, so we better get that played now. Right. So it's given me an excuse to buy more newer games and also try things that I maybe necessarily wouldn't have, and expand who I am as a gamer. Because like Ambi, one of my co-hosts, she and her husband are really big into 18xx games. Oh, nice. And I had never played an 18xx game before, but I visited them in the Bay Area back in February, and I played my very first 18xx game. And I don't think I would have probably even considered doing that prior to starting the podcast and getting to know Ambi. So how was it? Definitely expanded my...
What is an 18xx game?
So this is going to be where I struggle, because even having played one, it's still hard to wrap my head around. But 18xx games are stock market games and route building, usually related to trains, but not always. Right. And the reason that they're called 18xx games is because they are usually centered around periods in time when big things were happening in the railway industry or in specific countries. So it's, like one of them will be set in the United States, one of them will be set in Germany, one of them will be set in... I'm making things up now, but like Argentina or something like that.
Is it a series of games by one publisher, or is it a genre?
It's a genre.
It's a genre, but
really?
There aren't a lot of people making 18xx games. And now the naming conventions have kind of gone out the window, because there are things like 18 Ireland. And there's another one that just came out recently called Rolling Stock, which is also technically an 18xx game. But they're definitely crunchy, and they're hard to wrap your head around. But the cool thing about 18xx games is that there is no luck whatsoever. It is entirely skill-based. And so for people who really like deep strategy and they do dislike luck in games, it's a really cool thing to dive into. But they do often take a long time to play. Like, some of the games can take easily like 3 or 4 hours, or sometimes more, depending on how the game goes.
So not really a Blitz title, then, is what you're saying.
Definitely not a Blitz game.
Now, would you consider yourself now a passionate 18xx gamer?
I would say that is not the case, although it's funny, because having played an entire game of it, if you brought that exact game, 1857, and put it in front of me, I still don't think I would fully know what to do at any given moment. Ambi's husband, Toby, was super kind, and I guess a lot of 18xxers can, because they're in the hobby so hard, they're sometimes not as accommodating to players who are new to 18xx, and so you can kind of get trounced on your first playthrough depending on who you're playing with. But Toby was awesome and very helpful and willing to give me advice, and because it is such a deep game, there were basically I would narrow my options down, and I'd be like, okay, I'm thinking between this and this, what would you possibly recommend? And he was really good about, well, if you do that, then this could happen. If you do that, then this could happen. And he helped me. And I actually won, although I still don't know how.
I feel like a window to a whole new world just opened up, Russ.
Just like Aladdin. So
18xx.
Awesome. 18xx.
A whole new world.
They're very wow,
jeez. Everything's a song cue.
Well, Crstal, thank you so much for joining us here and telling us more about yourself and Boardgame Blitz. We're going to take
such a pleasure to talk to you guys.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from Total Fangirl. When we come back, Crstal will stick with us.
We're going to review an XX8.
No. We're going to talk a little bit about.
I blew it.
We're going to talk about Runewars and see if it appeals to a board gamer like Crstal. We'll find out more in a little bit.
This is Total Fangirl. Regular Jane most days, total fangirl when the moment strikes. Han shot first. Starbuck is a guy. And Lestat, now there's a vampire. Hey everyone, I'm Nicole, your Total Fangirl. You can follow me on Twitter at Nicole Wakeland and check out my blog, TotalFangirl.com. This week's shout out is to all of our wonderful supporters over at Patreon. Head to patreon.com/the D6 Generation and you too can support the show. So Russ may have mentioned this because he said he might, but I'm going to mention it because we were watching a show with the girls. We were watching Supergirl and we gave up on The Flash a long time ago just because it got a little too, I don't know, it's boring, predictable, uninteresting, wasn't doing it for us, despite thinking that it had kind of fun characters at times. But anyway, we had to watch it because there was a crossover episode of Supergirl and it resolved itself in the Flash world. So you had to go watch this episode of Flash to see what happened on Supergirl, which I kind of hate that because then we're like digging through like season 1. Okay, Supergirl, it was episode this and it aired on this date. So it has to be the Flash that aired on this date to make sure it's not going to make us watch the Flash. I don't know what the marketers think they're doing. We're not going to suddenly start watching the Flash because they made us watch one episode to find out what happened with Supergirl. Nope, we watch one episode and we'll go right back to Supergirl and won't watch Flash anymore. Anyway, so we go to watch the Flash. But the thing was they made this a musical episode of the show. Now, musical episodes, I was really trying to figure out when did these start becoming a thing? Like, when did it become a thing to make people who were actors and not necessarily singers, because the two do not go hand in hand, when did it become a thing to make them sing? And, excuse me, and I looked back and I remember there was like a Buffy episode, right? Wasn't there a Buffy the Vampire, big singing episode? And then that's the first one I can remember where they made people sing. And sometimes it works out because you have an actor or two who truly is quite the vocalist and can really sing and can really carry a tune and like knocks your socks off and you think, wow, I never knew that person could even sing. And then you have some people who are like the average Joes among us who, given really good studio mixing stuff and the opportunity to probably sing it 1,000 times and also having something that's written to meet our very limited ranges, we can sing. And then there's the people that can't. Like ever. They shouldn't try and sing. They should not do it ever. And we had a mix of all of that on Flash. And the people who couldn't really sing, man, they couldn't sing. And my oldest daughter is in chorus and she's really interested in singing and she's great and she has fun with it and it's a hobby for her that she adores. So she spends a lot of time listening to her chorus teacher telling her in school all the time, you know, you're flat, it is too sharp, you got to do this. She cringed through the entire episode. She kept saying, stop. It was awful. And it's not as though she's a professional vocalist or sings, you know, on Broadway or sings, you know, and is recorded. And she was cringing. So I can only imagine people who are really, really professional listening to this episode and absolutely cringing as they listen to the songs. So I was trying to figure out what the lore is. Why do they feel like putting actors into a situation where they are doing less than their best work is something that we all want to see? Like, I've thought in my head, yeah, I really want to see some of my favorite characters sound awful. I want to cringe for an hour. I just want to cringe for an hour. So if you guys could deliver that in the form of a musical, we'd be really grateful. Nobody thinks that. I think the only time any of us really want to hear a character sing is if they have a surprise hidden talent. Like before they became an actor or an actress, they were actually, you know, studying music and they could sing, or they really know how to play the piano. Cool. Or they really know how to play the guitar. Cool. That's always kind of fun to see them incorporate that kind of thing into a story where you take the skills of the person who's doing the acting and you incorporate side skills in for them that make their character better. Like, oh, and I just forgot her name. There was an actress and she was a ballet dancer. She's in all the Joss Whedon stuff. She was the one who was the Terminator in the Terminator remake that briefly aired on TV, and I've completely forgotten her name. But she was a ballerina, and they had scenes, and you've seen them in different things where they take advantage of the fact that she has the ability to dance like that, just in how she moves. Even the fight scenes in Firefly and different things in Firefly. You could see they were sort of choreographed, taking advantage of the fact that the woman could kick her toes up over her head. That's cool. But when they take actors and actresses who really can't do a thing, who are great actors and actresses and do their roles and their parts really, really well, and suddenly say, we're going to make you sing like you're on Broadway. Ready? Go. I don't know who really wants to see that. And I end up just watching the whole thing and feeling so bad for them. I just want it all to be over.
Hey, ho, ho, it's an awesome vacation and you have to go. That's the closest.
That was pretty good.
Thank you. That was off the cuff. So we just got back from Adepticon, and of course, part of Adepticon every year is hanging out with Terrace and the folks that go with him to Adepticon from Geek Nation Tours. So it's always at the top of our minds when we come home.
It is indeed. We have a great time with our friends at Geek Nation Tours. Adepticon tour, fantastic. It's great to see some of the same faces year after year on that tour. And that
these folks are doing this as their regular vacation
that
every
just goes
year.
to show you what a great experience a Geek Nation tour is, how Terrace takes you to all the great things, gets you those great, really intimate experiences with game designers, game publishers, people in the gaming media. He makes it just a real special experience. And year after year, not only new people, but veterans as well go on those Geek Nation tours to experience it. Because where else are you going to go and be with like-minded gamers? Going, and some of these people on these tours, they don't know each other except when they're on the tour. And so it's like to get back together with their old friends that they met on the Geek Nation tour they first did 3 years ago. And every year they go, they hang out, like getting back to the friends, get new experiences, remember old ones. And it doesn't matter whether you're going on a Geek Nation tour to Adepticon or Gen Con, or maybe you're doing the Star Trek tour and learning all about the great places the films are shot, or maybe you're doing the Doctor Who tour, or maybe you're doing famous historical battles tours anywhere around the world. There is no better tours service for geeks than Geek Nation Tours. And all you got to do...
No, you're...
Go ahead,
going to all these places with people who share your passion. It's awesome.
And just head over to geeknationtours.com. Click on that tours link up there on the top of the screen and just check out all the amazing options. Harry Potter, Star Trek, Gen Con, Germany.
How many tours to Japan is this guy taking?
Oh, man, Japan, anime, Sherlock Holmes in England, you name it. NASA, I mean, you name it. If it's geeky, Terrace goes there. And so, again, you can't have a better experience.
He's got a very broad definition of geeky, too.
He does. It covers it all. So that's all available at geeknationtours.com.
So here's the final score. Ripley has 147 victory points. Hicks has 132. I have 117. And Hudson has 87. That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over. What the frick are we going to do now? Put the game away.
This is the Dice Tower Network at dicetowernetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. And so you may have heard that at Adepticon, you cannot buy the Runewars Miniatures game yet. In fact, my copy that I get for doing some of the writing in the lore book was shipped the day after Adepticon closed. They clearly wanted the first splash of stuff to be available at Adepticon, and they shipped 2,000 copies of the actual core game. It's a $100 game to Adepticon to give away with the swag bags. So it was pretty impressive. I got a chance very briefly at Gen Con to play a quick demo, and then, of course, everybody had copies all over Adepticon. The Adepticon Council. Usually we don't get the swag bag. We're there to cover it. We're there as media, and we want that stuff to go to the people who are paid and they go there to have a good time. Where we're there, we have an awesome time, but we're more there as a job. But this time around, they were awesome. They gave Russ and I each a copy so we could start going through the rules, which we did immediately. And we thought, what better time to talk about this game than right now, right moments before it's available. So we thought this would be a great opportunity, but also because we have Crstal on the show, who is an established board gamer, and we think that Runewars, the miniatures game, is kind of trying to make a play for the board gamer to bring the board gamer, if they're so inclined, into the miniatures game realm. So that's how this all came about. It's sort of synergy, all built on each other, and that's what we thought when we decided to put that into the episode.
I would say it's fate. That's what I would say.
Kismet.
Definitely.
Kismet. So we'll do, this is not going to be a full review because, quite frankly, Craig and I have only played the game, twice. And
As
both
a
in
demo.
more of a demo mode. So, and we're definitely going to revisit the game in more of a full classic D6G review format, probably later in the year when the other factions that they've announced at Gamma come out. I've gone on record before that saying I don't think miniature games will really be successful unless they have good faction variety. So I really want to wait and see that. But I do think there's a lot of excitement about this game, and I think it'd be great to share the information with you guys. And I really am curious, Crstal, what your opinion of this is.
I'm excited to hear more about it.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So first, real quick, the overview here. This thing, as Craig mentioned, $100 retail. It's coming out this month. I believe it's middle of April. So by the time you hear this, it'll probably be in stores like days after you hear this episode. So this isn't really a super early preview or anything. The pitch is it's a miniature game taking place in the Terranoth universe. And Crstal, you know the Terranoth universe well. Which board game got you into the universe?
Runebound, specifically originally the second edition, is what hooked me, and now I own the third edition of Runebound.
And of course, I never played Runebound, but I got into Descent first edition, and have been playing Descent fairly regularly ever since. And so I'm a huge Descent fan. And then, of course, Craig and I really got into and very much loved the Runewars board game with the now famous little plastic mountains that came up through the Texas, which was awesome.
Yeah, no longer.
Yeah, I know they get rid of that. And there's been several other card games. So there's now quite a few different games that Fantasy Flight has published that take place in their own fantasy world that is Terranoth. Correct? Going out there. It is a 2-player miniature game, and they have obviously a lot of lore going on here. And so I thought, Crstal, maybe you could kind of. Could you give us the little back of the box sort of dramatic reading of the game that is Runewars, the miniature game?
For years, the armies of Waykar, the Undying, have stayed within their borders, launching only minor raids across the border. But now, a nameless threat stirs within the Mistlands, and legions of undead cross into the realm of Terranoth under Waykar's command. The Dakan lords have sounded the call to war, and their finest generals lead armies of warriors and golems to take up defensive positions in the border territory of Roth's Vale. The first battles of the next great war are about to begin.
Ooh.
Ta-da! Very well done.
Very nicely done. Very dramatic.
I could almost hear the horns.
I thought I was standing on a field. I thought I was standing on a battlefield watching it happen. So,
I'm sure I pronounced something wrong, but
nope,
hey,
you did not.
Craig,
yes,
as one of the many Fluffmeisters, how did she do on that?
I thought you did great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So
I'm sad that an editor did not catch within their borders. They made raids across their border.
Yes.
But, other than that,
as I was reading it, I was like, that sounded like something I just said. But whatever. Here we go. We're keeping still going.
That's how it appears.
Constant special,
Crstal.
Unfortunate.
Didn't get yeah, there you go.
So the rest.
I didn't write that, by the way. Just put that on.
So the rest of the battle of back of the box summarizes the fact that it's a 2-player miniature game. But what I thought was pretty interesting was sort of like the last sentence is like. Customize your armies to bring an entirely unique touch to your game and enter the hobby of miniature painting. When I read that, I think they're not necessarily expecting existing miniature gamers to go, ooh, another miniature game, as much as they're expecting board gamers to maybe try a miniature game out for the first time. But clearly, dropping 2,000 copies at Adepticon, one of the most premier miniature gaming conventions in the United States, they're kind of wanting to pitch it to us as well, right? So it's kind of in the middle there. And my summary for this would be, what if Warhammer Fantasy Battles and X-Wing had a baby? That's kind of what I think is going on here. Is that fair, Craig?
That's not maybe how I would have put it, but sure, it's fair.
Sure. Or maybe the Runewars board game and X-Wing had a baby. Is kind of where it's going. So let's talk about what's in the box.
It'll be that whole baby thing.
So Crstal, before we get there, did the world sound interesting to you? Is it enough to like, ooh, 2 armies fighting in Terranoth sounds fun to me?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I know people like to criticize the quote unquote generic fantasy theme, but I love fantasy themed games, so it sounds really nice. And who doesn't like hordes of the undead? Come on.
And there is something to the world.
It's a safe bet.
It's kind of funny because I didn't really think about myself as being like a Tyranoth fan, right? Like it's not like some of the bigger worlds like, StarCraft or Warhammer or Tolkien. I never really thought about that, but I do distinctly remember when I first played Runewars, the board game, going, oh, look at the little razor wings, because I remembered them from Descent. So it's kind of like, so I realized, and then the heroes being the same heroes, so I do think I didn't realize I was as vested as in the universe as I guess I ended up being, and I think there might be more of that out there, because they've sold a lot of copies of Descent. They've sold a lot of copies of Runebound and Runewars, the board game.
That's
so
true. I've played Descent before as well, so.
Yeah. So there's a lot in this box. Let's figure out $100 sounds like a lot of money to a board gamer. To a miniature gamer, though, that's a pretty low cost of entry if you give me a lot of models. So let's think about what comes in here. So first, you do get 3 full-color rules booklets. Now, here is one place I think Fantasy Flight already has an advantage over many other miniature war games because of how a few years ago Fantasy Flight made the decision that when they release a board game, they always have 2 booklets. One book is the Learn How to Play book, right, that walks you through how to play the game. And the other book is the Rules Reference book, which is not meant to be read cover to cover, but rather it is specifically designed as a reference with all sections in alphabetical order, an extremely clear index, and very detailed information about each possible mechanic of the game, right? And this is often poorly done in miniature games. In fact, I've said many times before that only War Machine, I think, really does this right. And I think here, they've already set themselves up to be a bit of a differentiator in their very clear reference book, but also their really cool Learn to Play guide, which most miniature war games don't do well at all. And then thirdly, they have this great lore book, which Craig was involved with heavily, but it's really just a book that is background material on 4 different factions, which I think is really interesting. Especially if you're a Tyranoth fan, because there hasn't really been sort of a lore book of Tyranoth, right? None of the games to date have really had an overall backstory for the world, right? Craig, what did you think of the books when you looked through them a little bit?
Well, I was reminded of Imperial Assault because, as you said, this is the new model for Fantasy Flight. So you've got the Learn to Play. It can be a little confusing to start with because the Learn to Play teaches you almost everything, but not quite everything. And there's little notes here or there, like, we're not going to teach you this. Look in the other book for this later on and things like that. But as a reference, once you've kind of got the key concepts down, I think it's great, especially with the rules reference book as a separate book. It's very accessible. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was great. The artwork is very loyal to the Rune Wars, Rune Bound Descent world of Tyranoth that's been established for years and years now. So it looks exactly as you would expect, with some cool pictures of models along the way. So I think really, as far as from a getting to know the game and then learning the game and then referencing things while you play the game perspective, I would agree with Russ that it's really there isn't anyone else in the industry who does that aspect of it as well as Fantasy Flight, or better anyway. Yeah,
I would say so. So you get the 3 great books right in the top of the box. You're going to dive right into those and get sucked in probably. Now also you're going to get these dual turn order dials. So
8, they're called command tools.
Command tools, thank you. And the command tools insert into little bases and can stand up behind each unit. And there's a dual dial on there, more about how they work later. But think about X-Wing, how each, and Armada, how each unit has their own dials you can choose that are optimized for them. So each unit in your army is going to have its own set of command, what are they called, Craig? Command?
They're command tools.
Thank you. Each set of their own command tools that are optimized and sort of unique to each unit.
So the options you have are all on those tools. You don't have to remember what the abilities are or whatever. You have a card that'll give you the stats, and then you have the command tool that gives you all the maneuver and special order options for that unit. And so you spin the dials and do what you got to do.
Exactly. Now, also in the box are movement templates. So just like X-Wing, or Armada. There are movement templates in there.
It's X-Wing, not Armada.
Well, yes, very much.
Armada's got that cranky tool.
Well, they both have little template thingies. But yes, so X-Wing has the little templates. So does this. There's straight ones and left turnies and right turnies, all with different speed numbers on them. So that's easy to move around. There's no need for tape measures or anything else in this game. You got tons of models and tons of these sort of interlocking bases to form your units. Craig, how many models come in the box? Do you know off the top of your head? I forget. It's a lot.
I believe it said 48.
Yeah, 48.
Let me look because it's right up here.
Right.
48 beautifully sculpted, unpainted figures.
Go 48 models in the box, which is a big chunk of models, and they're nice size. They look like they're right in the 28 millimeter range, right, Craig? They feel like they're right in that,
I would say they look like heroic 28.
Yeah, so they're about the same size as most, War Machine, Warhammer Fantasy, or 40,000, kind of in that zone. You got a bunch of cards in there. You got upgrade cards for your units. You got unit cards that tell all the detailed stats about them. You got these, they're not called morale cards, but I think of them as morale cards. There's a little deck of cards that you kind of draw when you win a battle that may or may not influence a unit.
They actually call them morale cards.
Oh, I guessed properly. Look at that.
Well done.
And you also get a bunch of these crazy custom dice that Fantasy Flight's getting really good at as well. Loads of tokens. And, of course, it's a Fantasy Flight game, which means 0 box control. There is no way to manage.
That's just all hanging in the breeze right there.
Nothing whatsoever, not even little baggies. And once your models are all built, they're not going back in that box. I'll tell you that right now. So,
unless you don't care for them.
You want a little thing. But as a miniature gamer, that feels like a pretty good value to me. 40-plus models, plus bunch of templates, great components. There's also cards in there for mission cards. There's also deployment cards. A lot of cool stuff going on in there. Crstal, for $100, how does that? What do you think? If someone told me that's, you kind of look at the pictures on the website, you kind of know what it's going to be. How does $100 feel to you for that?
That actually seems like a pretty good value, especially considering games that have come out recently. Like, I think board games, just like I think that as you're talking about miniatures games or maybe trying to move into the realm of board games, I think some board games are kind of trying to also move toward the miniatures games.
Sure.
The Mechs versus Minions that came out last year, I think, is a good example of that. And that game was, cost $75. But obviously that everyone says is a $150 game if it's produced by any smaller company that doesn't have a bajillion dollars at their leisure to use. But it sounds $100 for that many minis sounds like a really good value, even to somebody like me who isn't as familiar with how much minis should cost and whatever. But based on what you described on what comes in the box, I think that sounds completely reasonable.
Cool. Craig, as a miniature gamer, do you think it's a good value?
I do. I think if you look at, you're getting almost 50 models, so that's like $2 a model. Mm-hmm. So I think it places it right around what you'd expect from other like sort of starter sets. Mm-hmm. But then the starter, the interesting thing when you look at other like models wise, I'm trying to think. For instance, that's roughly the price I think that you'd pay for the the War Machine starter, right?
I think War Machine starter is $50, but it's only one side. So for both,
they
two players, two-player is the same. Is about $100. Yep, and
around that,
and
probably fewer models.
And Kickoff is cheaper, but Kickoff's only like 12 models. So but it does. What I also think is good about this is it passes the what we now start to call in the miniature gaming world, Crstal, the Christmas morning test. So,
thanks to Matt Hart.
So when the folks at Steamforged Game were building the Guild Ball starter box, one of the things about miniature gaming that's tough is, they use tape measures, you need glue to assemble all your models, you need a table to play on, you need all these things, and the Guild Ball box has everything inside you need to play. This is very close to that. I say close because it's missing terrain. It has terrain in there, but you'd still be playing on a boring brown tabletop. But you could theoretically, everything you need in there, it's even got some terrain tokens. So you could open the box up. You don't need a tape measure because there's movement templates. The models will essentially snap together. You might want to dab a glue there, but you could do it without it if you wanted to. You could be playing on a table within an hour or so, needing nothing else besides what comes in the box. So it does pass sort of you open it up on Christmas morning, you're ready to play without having to go to the store. It does pass that.
I think that's important, especially if they are trying to appeal to board gamers, because I think one of the reasons that a lot of board gamers are probably hesitant to jump into miniatures games is they don't necessarily feel like they'll know what to do when they buy a miniatures game. Like, well, wait, I need to paint them first, and I have to build terrain and I have to do all this other stuff. Oh, I'm just going to go play a board game instead. But if they can make it more approachable and a little bit easier to get into from the get-go, I think that's definitely a way to appeal to the other group.
I agree. And I think we saw Steamforge do a really good job with the kickoff box. I mean, I think a lot of people could get into that game and not even realize it's technically a miniature game. And I think here it's closer to what X-Wing is, which is X-Wing. It's hard to tell if you could talk to people whether X-Wing's a miniature game or a board game. And I think Rune Wars could do that, could walk that fine line as well, maybe. We'll see. Craig, what did you think? And Crstal, I'm curious about your thoughts, too, as you see the pictures of these models on their website. Craig, what did you think of the models as a miniature gamer? What's the quality there? How would you compare the quality to other games that people might know?
I would say they feel like they're a little more solid, a little more hard plastic than like the classic Descent or classic board game models. I haven't had a chance to go through my box yet, so all I have to go on are the models from the demo, and you're usually moving those around on a tray to try to be kind and polite. But the detail is really nice. They look really good. They're quality minis. They don't look like they're cheap, mushy, amorphous board game pieces at all. No, I think you have 4 poses per troop type as well. So that gives a lot of variety in the unit. And when you're putting it together, you might be able to tweak it a little bit here or there to make it make them a little bit even more different. And even the big guys, the Carrion Rider and the Golem, when those expansion packs come out, they're going to have 2 different poses for each of even the big guys. So even if you have a unit of the big guys, there's going to be some variation. So I think they put some thought into that.
I think so too, and I like the look. I'd say it's at they're really good quality. They're in the realm probably a little higher than Imperial Assault and the Descent 2. The newer models than Descent 2. I know they've been going back and replacing all the old models with new ones. And you definitely can see the quality improvements there. I think these are in that realm, maybe a little bit higher than that because they're even a little firmer plastic and require a little assembly because they're so detailed. I think also we should mention the bases are really interesting. So they're these consistent sort of square bases that interlock. So you got a base that's, I want to say they're like 2x2, something like close to that, right? And they interlock to form larger movement trays. So if you've seen Warhammer Fantasy Battles or other, sort of infantry-based miniature games where your guys are walking around these giant trays, these things interlock to form very large trays. The miniatures sort of snap into these, but you don't want to glue them in because part of the game mechanics are as guys get killed, you pop them out of their little bases, and then when a whole base is taken out, you pop that entire base out of the unit. And that's a very important part of the game because there are mechanics that kick in based on how many trays are in the unit that are full and everything else like that. So don't glue your models to the bases because you need to be able to remove them. Basically, is the moral there. But it's a pretty interesting system, and I do think it looks fantastic on the table. Crstal, from the pictures, what do you think? How does it look to you as a board gamer? Do the models look, in the realm of what you see from Cool Mini or not, or those kinds of things?
I mean, obviously, the pictures that they're displaying on their website are the ones that are, fully painted and all decked out and whatnot. But holy moly, I am drooling over this rune golem that they have on one of the pages. That is such a cool looking mini. And I think the amount of detail in these can help, especially people like me. Like, I like thematic stuff, and so when I can look down at a table and feel like I can see the battle happening in front of me, I feel like that would be a really good way to kind of maybe suck me into a world like this.
Good. Well, what a segue you set up for me, Crstal. This is like you are like a professional podcaster over there. So speaking of
I'm only 10 months professional.
It feels like 10 years. So speaking of being sucked into a world, so we did there. Let's talk a little bit before we get into the rules. Let's talk a little about the factions and the lore that's available, Craig. And we just happen to have on this very podcast, through a complete coincidence of quirk of fate.
Yes, indeed.
An individual who may or may not have written huge chunks, or at least small chunks, or parts of. We're not really sure exactly how much, actually.
It's hard to tell the way FFG edits and does the layout.
The lore book. So in the box set, Craig, there are 2 factions. Which 2 factions come in the Rune Wars box set?
That would be the Legions of Wakar the Undying, and those are your pretty much classic undead. So there's a large block of 16 armored infantry, like armored skeletons, and then there's 8 archers, skeleton archers that any player of Descent will be familiar with. The troop type, the models are brand new, but the skeletons with bows and arrows, that's pretty standard. And then they get a big monster riding warrior, and then they get Ardus Ex Erebus, who is an undead champion who's basically the general of the army. And then the other side are your classic human good guys with quotes around it. And that would be the
War Master has failed.
Yeah, I know. The Dakan lords, which are the baronies of the north. So every barony will have its own color scheme. So the books kind of hint at that. So that'll be cool. You'll have some variation there. And in that unit, you have 16 spearmen with shields that are a really cool looking unit. You have 4 knights on horseback. Then their big giant model, as Crstal said, is this big giant 4-armed golem with 2 huge massive swords. And then their commander she's kind of like a ranger who was trained by elves. And the commanders have their own little unique diorama bases, so that's cool. So you've got these two, sort of a classic matchup of the humans versus the undead right out of the box.
Very nice. And in the lore book, there are 2 more factions described. Can you mention those a little bit?
Yes, those would be the Latari elves and the I am now drawing another blank, but I have this book right here.
Chaos.
And that would be, it's not really chaos.
Demons.
It's the Uthuk Ilan, which are these barbarian tribes who worship demons.
Yeah.
And they basically infuse themselves with demon blood that makes them then mutate. So a Warhammer Fantasy player who was dating himself might just say chaos.
Yes, he would. So now what's interesting is Fantasy Flight has said there are 2 more factions coming by the end of the year, but they have not announced what those 2 factions will be. But
and their employees at Adepticon were not allowed to even hint at them or say the word.
But in the lore book, it describes 4 factions. So I think you can guess that probably...
And the commander for the humans actually has a special rule where she's allowed to recruit 1 unit of elves.
Yes. So I think we can pretty much safely assume that the demon worshippers and the elves will be out
probably going to be
by the end of the year. I think that's probably a safe bet. So I'm really excited about this because I have talked about the rule of 4 before, that any miniature war game needs 4 factions. So if inside the first year they can get 4 factions out the door, I think this is a nice variety. I think you get your elves, your demonic creatures, your undead, and your humans. I think that would be awesome. And if they can sprinkle in a few war engines or other cool things in there, I think it'll be pretty interesting. Crstal, do those factions sort of strike your fancy? Do you think that's the right balance of different kinds of things to make things interesting?
I think that's a pretty good balance. You've kind of got, a couple that are more classically good guys and a couple that are more classically bad guys, and you can throw them against each other, but it's also fun to throw the undead against the demonic guys, because then it's just all dark and creepy and awesome.
That's right. So which faction does any faction appeal to you? Is there one that if you were going to collect a single faction, which one would you think about?
It's funny. I tend to always gravitate toward the what is in some games the boring faction, like the humans. So I actively try not to choose them, even though they tend to appeal to me. Based on those 4 that you described, I think the demonic ones would actually be the ones that I would be most interested in playing, because I consider myself to be a bit of a goody two-shoes in real life. So I kind of like being ooh, I'm the dark and awful ones.
Nice. I think that's excellent. So the chaos, there you go, or the demons, I guess. What is their name, Craig? I forget already. So I got to work on this. The name of the demon worshipping faction.
Uthuk Ilan.
Uthuk
Ilan, or the locusts.
The locust. All right.
Because they sort of swarm over everybody.
Awesome. So good variety, good starter box prices, really cool looking models. Let's talk about how the game plays. Now, we're not I would just want a disclaimer here. Again, we've only played a couple demo games, and I did dive into the rulebook pretty quick. Craig and I were really fascinated with how much cool mechanics are captured on the cards. So we'll talk about this.
Which is pretty standard for FFG.
Yes, they love to put their stuff. They love to put the complexity in their cards to keep the game as simple as possible, which I think is a pretty smart play. So let's talk about the mechanics. It's a pretty straightforward game, which is nice because I think it's going to be one of those games where it's not going to be hard to teach, but there's going to be a lot of depth to it and a lot to learn about how the different units interact as you play the game more and more often. So first of all, there's a set of deployment cards and a set of mission cards. And the deployment cards describe, which edges of the table you're going to set up on your armies on and how far in they're going to be. And what you're going to do is there's a mechanic that allows one player to pick the mission card, the other player to pick the deployment card, and that's going to dictate your objectives as well as how you're going to set up the game board, right? And there's also rules for deploying terrain as well to get the interesting, so you're going to have a tabletop that is, there's no board in this game. It's like, for those of you who played X-Wing, it's like that, or miniature gamers know the situation well, which is you're either going to play on an empty table or maybe throw down a nice mat. They have some pre-shaped terrain in there you can use, like X-Wing has the little asteroids you can pop out. Or if you're a miniature gamer and got some cool trees and hills and everything lying around in your collection, you can, of course, use those as well. Anything fantasy will do here. So that's how you get started. The next thing you're going to do is determine player priority. So one player will essentially be the player with priority, and there's a classic little FFG dial here that's going to count the number of turns, and the player who has priority is going to have the dial next to them. And that's turns are actually kind of simultaneous, but player priority will kick in at a couple points in the round, and I'll explain that in a second. Then there's an interesting mechanic. You're going to literally drop the rune tokens. So there's a bunch of these double-sided rune tokens, and you're going to sort of hold a certain number in your hand. I assume it's based on game size, I think, but you're going to shake them and drop them, and these are going to then land on the table like little cardboard coins, and the different sides are going to show different rune icons, and certain units have powers that are or special rules that kick into different levels based on how many runes are currently active. It's kind of reminds me of the Warhammer Fantasy Winds of Magic situation where different turns would be different times to cast spells. But here it's not just spells. Different units have different powers. So, for example, the Golem, which is a magical creature, some of his attacks get stronger or his defenses get stronger depending on how the runes drop. And the Undead have one of their units that if the runes drop a certain way, some of their destroyed units will resurrect and kind of come back out of the ground because it's a unit of skeletons, right? So, and those rules are right in the cards, but basically you're looking at your cards, seeing which kind of rune icons that make sense, and when those runes drop, it might dictate whether it's a good time to get risky with your skeletons or maybe charge in with that giant golem because his runes are all glowing bright and he's ready to kick some undead butt, right?
Yep.
So that's how that happens. Then... Oh, Crystal's letting me know there's something similar to the rune tokens in Runebound. How does that work in Runebound? Does it remind you of that?
Yeah, they actually, in the 3rd edition of Runebound, they replaced the combat dice with cardboard tokens. So all of the items that you purchase in Runebound are on tokens, and based on when you flip them into the air or drop them, what side they land on, that allows you to spend different abilities during combat back and forth with your opponent. So you will each have a set of tokens, and you can stack them on top of each other to like double the abilities to some degree and some other stuff like that. So when you were describing the tokens for this game, I was kind of already like, ooh, like I like that mechanic in Runebound. So now cool. I'm even more intrigued.
Well, it sounds like it's very similar, and it sounds like it's a little nod or callback to that. I think it's awesome they're bringing those mechanics forward. So it's not just in the same universe, but they're actually bringing forward some of those game mechanics as well. That's neat. I love it. So once you've dropped your tokens and you've done that, you're pretty much ready to start locking in your order. So here's where the game is very similar to X-Wing. Crystal, have you ever played X-Wing before?
I have seen X-Wing played near me a whole bunch of times, but I've never actually played it myself.
I've been in the proximity of X-Wing being
That's all
played.
you really need.
That's all you need to know. You can learn.
I love Star Wars. Anything Star Wars is great, and so I've always kind of been like, oh man, that looks really cool. I should totally try that sometime. And then I go back to playing my silly board games.
No, they're not silly. So, well, great. So you know basically that the players will lock in their little order dials all at the same time, put them face down, and then sort of in pilot skill order, you start revealing these dials, right? Well, it's not that dissimilar in this game. So each player's got those command controls. Is that right, Craig? Command controls.
Controller, I think.
Okay, the command controllers. And what these do is they can stand up behind
command
each
tools.
of your... Command tools, thank you. They stand up behind each unit. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and... There's actually, on each command tool, there are 2 dials to set. and you're going to set these dials and stand them up behind your units so you can see them, but your opponent can't. Now, these two dials, the dial on the left is sort of the primary dial, and you're really picking this dial to choose the kind of movement you might do, or the kind of, if you're going to try to charge and engage the enemy. So there's a bunch of icons that basically say, I'm going to move. There's sort of an arrow indicating if it's a straight ahead move, a move to the left, and a move to the right.
That one just describes speed.
Yeah, okay, speed. So it's just your speed, right? And there's a number next to it for how far you're going to go, and then there's also a little number in the upper left-hand corner, which is the initiative of that chosen command as well. These are also all color-coded, because the other dial, which is kind of like your bonus stat or
modifier dial.
Right. What you choose on the modifier is restricted based on the color of the speed you chose, right? So, and some of these modifiers are maybe +1 defense, so you kind of imagine your troop with its shields is going forward with its shields up. Some of them are modifiers to attack, so maybe they're going forward maybe with their spears out and their shields kind of down. Some of them are you're expecting to actually, at the end of your movement, hit the enemy and be able to charge them, so you're trying to get a bonus attack there, so you're kind of prepared for charge. Some of them are like the undead can do one, which basically causes you to draw an additional morale card, so they're trying to cause fear. And these icons are different.
This is also where the turning comes in.
Yes, and where the turning comes in as well. So you're kind of restricting these two things. So if you're moving super fast, you don't have all the options for defense because the colors have to match on both these dials. So it's really interesting because it's a very simple mechanic, but it gives a lot of depth. And what's on these dials are very different. So the undead have the ability to increase panic. Other factions have no ability to increase panic, but they can increase their defense, so they can increase their offense, or they can charge farther, or they can charge in a turn, or whatever. So there's a lot of cool options going on here in these two dials. But basically what you're trying to do at this point is set all your units' movements, you're locking them all in at the same time, and you're trying to anticipate what your opponent's doing at the same time. Does that make sense, Crstal?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
that cat and mouse, that rock, paper, scissors, like you know what you think they're going to do, but do they know that you know kind of a thing?
Yes. And if you're a miniature gamer out there and you've ever played any historical sort of troops and blocks sort of game, or you played Warhammer Fantasy Battles or War of Kings or anything like that, you'll know that if you get charged in the flank, right, in the side, or if you get charged in the back, it's very bad from a tactical military point of view, and you want to avoid that. Well, this game has very severe penalties for getting hit in the side or the rear. So in addition to trying to guess what your opponent's going to do and position yourself properly to charge them, you're also trying to outflank and outmaneuver your opponent as well. So it's very much a game of maneuver, get around behind the guy, get him in the side, and try to guess him, while trying to also boost and buff all your abilities at the same time by doing proper dial turning, right? So it's all sort of built into there. Then what you do is, once it's all set up, we've locked in all our moves. So I say, Craig, my guys are all ready, and Craig says, my guys are all ready. Then we say, next to each of these dials is a little initiative number. So also, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the movement choice, the speed you chose, it also gives you an initiative on your unit. And again, these are all custom per unit. So high speed for one unit might be low initiative, but for another unit might be high initiative. So it's completely based on the unit. We're going to start counting down from highest initiative to lowest. And so I'll say, Craig, you have any fives? Because I got 1 5. And Craig will say, I've got no 5. So I can flip my 5 control over, or tool over, and say, okay, you're going to activate my 5 initiative unit, and I'll just do what it says in the dial, which usually means I'm going to find the template, right, the movement template that matches the speed I chose and the direction I chose, put it next to my little base, and it kind of locks in there in a fancy way to the base. You move the thing to the edge of the template. The thing is moved. You know, there's no debate like there is in some of the miniature war games about, pivoting wrong or rotating or anything else. You just kind of slide it down there. Oh, one of the orders, though, is to pivot in place. Right,
it is indeed. One is also to shift.
Yes, shift slightly as well. So you go on the template, you put your template down, you move if you've got any moves, and then if you manage to engage the enemy, or maybe you chose an action to shoot, if you have an archer unit, for example, you can then do the shoot attack as well, and we'll get into combat in a second. But that's pretty much it. So I do my move, I do my attack if I have one, and then we go, okay, anybody else, any other 5 initiative guys? Nope. Anybody got any 4s? And if Craig's got a 4, then Craig goes. And if we both have a unit at the same initiative step, let's say we both have a 4, then it goes to whichever player has got the turn priority, right? So if Craig has turn priority and both have a 4, then Craig would go with his 4 first. I'd go with my 4. If Craig has another 4, he'd go again. So we'd go back and forth until all of our 4s had activated, and then we'll go down to the 3s. Making sense, Crstal?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense so far.
Cool. And that's it. So basically, you just activate till you're done, and once everybody's done with activating all their units, Craig passes the priority dial over to me because now I've got priority. We rotate the priority dial to turn 2, and we redrop the rune tokens, and we lock in our orders and go again. And that's pretty much the game except for the nuances of combat. Combat's really pretty simple. You get a dice pool based on
FFG.
It's very Fantasy Flight, right? So each unit, in addition to their command tool, also has a card that's got a little fluff on it, some art on it, and the basic stats of the unit, which include the number of dice it throws at its ranged attack and its melee attack. And this iconography actually looks very similar to Descent, and I bet it probably looks pretty similar to the Runebound iconography as well. And I think, Craig, are these D10s? I feel like they're D10s.
They're
might be
D8s, I believe.
D8s, okay. And they're colored, just like Fantasy Flight does, so the red one's a little, different power levels, whether it's red or blue.
Yeah.
And there's
D8s, and then there's the hero dice or D12s.
Oh, that's what it is. So you roll the dice pool, and you might get bonus dice depending on if you have extra ranks involved in a combat or extra frontage. I think one of them, I forget which one does which, but one of them gives you rerolls and one of them gives you more dice, right? Or one of them, it doubles your number of its successes.
The depth gives you more, gives you rerolls.
Yep.
And the width
gives you success
multiplies the wounds that you do.
That's right. So let's say you roll 2 successes and you've got an extra width wide, you double it to 4, right? Yep. And let's say you only rolled 1 success and you had a miss with the other die, but you got an extra rank deep, you get to reroll for each of your ranks deep, right? So that's the 2 things that do that for you.
Yeah, and I liked the way they described that because basically he said the more models you have in your unit, the more consistent their performance is going to be.
Right. Which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. Then after the battle's over, you're going to draw, the loser is essentially going to draw morale cards, and that's going to be, the recipient, actually only one side fights. The attacker rolls his dice, does some damage to the other unit. The other unit then draws a number of morale cards based on...
No. The attacker sees how many panic tokens there are in the dice and everything else. Then he draws the number of morale cards equal to the number of morale icons out there, and he gets to choose one and then apply that to the other guy's unit.
That's right, I forgot. So yes, the attacker draws the number of cards based on the icons, and also the number of icons he rolled also indicates how powerful of the cards he drew he could play. So each card has a cost on it in icons. And
1 through 3.
Yes. And so what's cool about the skeletons, for example, is one of their modifier dials gives them a free one of these icons. So it's basically their dice result plus 1. So the skeletons can always do a little more fear-causing stuff. One of these cards
and they're immune to some of the fear-causing stuff too. So what the pretty much the standard undead stuff you get in most fantasy war games is in here, but instead of being in the rule book and you have to memorize it, it's actually on the dials and on the little card area, and that's it.
Right. That's what makes it great, because no one else can really do that except for the skeleton unit. So it's kind of a neat way to kind of build all the special unit rules in that make skeletons without having to have any kind of, big army book with all the rules for skeletons in it. You don't have to have that at all in the game, which is neat. Right. So, Crstal, does that all make sense, the combat system?
That actually, I'm kind of upset right now because everything sounds kind of wonderful, and I do not need another hobby.
So here's what gets even better. So when you cause wounds, this is my favorite part. So when you cause wounds, so let's say I got three successes. You compare it to, there's a wound counter, right? A resistance number on the card, Craig, of some kind. And if you exceed that number, it causes, one wound, which is usually a death for every time. And in a basic unit, 1 wound is 1 dude, right? So you might kill 3 skeletons. So you literally, the attacker can choose which ones pop out, right?
Yes, but they've got to be from the back row.
Yes, they've got to be from the back tray. And what you're trying to do is get whole trays off. So let's say each tray holds 4 skeletons. If you can get 4 skeletons killed, that'll remove their entire little plastic tray from the unit, which is important because that reduces frontage, which remember means you get to get multipliers, and it also reduces depth, which gives you rerolls. So the more of those trays you can remove, you eventually have battlefield degradation, right? You'll have, as units get wounded, they become less reliable and do less damage. And the skeletons are particularly interesting because if they have a tray with any missing dudes and the runes drop right, they raise dudes back. So with the skeletons, it's really important you take out whole trays, otherwise they'll be resurrecting their little guys and keep coming at you. So again, really simple mechanics, but really, really flavorful. And you really see these, you start the game with these nice full units, and over time, the models start dying and the units get smaller, and you start realizing, oh God, that giant block of dudes is no longer a giant block of dudes. And it just really gets interesting. So lots of cool fun there. So that's pretty much it. That's the overall mechanics of the game. I thought it might be interesting to kind of discuss a little bit about the potential we see here, having now talked about how it works. Craig, what do you think? How does it compare to what else is out there? Do you think, as a miniature gamer, do you think this has got some legs?
I do. I think pretty much everything you expect from a miniatures game is in here. But again, like if you think about Armada or X-Wing, it's all in different places. That, like I said, there's the one thing I don't like about the way Fantasy Flight does things. I love the way they do it. But in those rare instances where I want to take a rule book with me, like on a plane or something like that, there's no one rule book you can take with you. Instead, you have to take 3 rule books and 2 or 3 stacks of cards. Because you're going through, because that's where all the information is. And luckily, what they do is, and they do this for X-Wing also, the dials are actually all on the back of the Learn to Play book. So you don't have to take those with you, because you can see all the different options that each of the units have. But the main thing is, it's all there is the key. So when you're playing, it's awesome. It's just those rare instances where you'd like to maybe take it to work or take it on a plane. You're going to take a lot more stuff. But I mean, the morale is in there. A lot of the stuff that you would normally think of as fiddly in another miniatures game is being taken care of for you. So again, I think that is probably Fantasy Flight's strongest suit right now in their design portfolio, would be getting mechanisms in the game to do multiple things that like you don't even notice they're doing. Unless you're like looking at like the panic element of the undead. That's all that's baked into the game itself, into the dials, into the cards. So it doesn't say they're really good and they cause fear and they do all this stuff. So you don't have to worry about that confusion, or when they say cause fear, do they mean like the rule fear, or instead it's all done for you? So you're more worried about how do I get them where I want them to go, to do what I want them to do. And the game is more like, it's mostly like getting out of your way. So you're doing this strategy, and the game itself is then sort of like letting that play out. And I really enjoy that aspect of it.
And based on your description, it sounds like they do a really good job of making, and Fantasy Flight has done this in other games as well, as making the mechanics match the theme in a way that it just automatically makes sense to you.
Yeah, it just goes all together. Yeah, which I think is great.
Exactly.
What about you, Russ? How do you feel it compares to like? I mean, we haven't really dipped our toe into fantasy wargaming in a long time. So where do you think this positions itself?
Well, early this episode, I mentioned Eden and how I read the rule book, and sort of my philosophy about seeing if I want to get into a miniature game is I actually get the rule book, which has the fluff in it too, and see if it calls to me, right? And one of the things that happened with this was, we got the box to play the demo, and then I took the books and just, kind of read them on the plane on the way back, and it did call to me because a lot of the Terranoth stuff came back to me, but also the mechanics really came back to me. And as I looked through, you're right, Craig, it's hard on the plane to kind of look through the decks of cards and things, but what was cool was there's a lot of army list building options in here that are pretty neat. Like as I went through and saw the different rank options and how you can insert your golem into you can either field your golem as a giant solo dude, or you can, if you have enough guys, you can put them in as a centerpiece in a giant unit of men surrounding a big golem, or you can field it in a unit of 3 golems if you have enough golems. So there's a really very much, and there's different poses, so you can build them that way. There's a bunch of cards around unit upgrades, so you can actually give the units additional powers. Sort of if you're a Games Workshop fan, war gear, that kind of thing's available in here now. So a lot of those elements you like, but it's got that super clear, easy to use rules. Fantasy Flights has demonstrated they can do a great job with organized play with X-Wing. They've got fantastic tournament systems with X-Wing that are very fair and from all intents and purposes, really well run. They have the opportunity here to get a really fluffy, fun game to play that also has a solid rule set that you can play competitively and have fun with. So I think they've got all the elements here and in a very unique set of mechanics. I think the planning your move before you go gives a really interesting feel that you don't get in a lot of other miniature war games right now. And it feels like it plays pretty fast. I mean, we got to play more to get some more data on that, but it doesn't feel like it drags on and takes a long time, because once you've locked in those moves, it's pretty much a formality, right? You just flip the things over and start doing stuff, So I really and one other thing, Craig, the way they've got very clear rules on what happens when units touch. So that's one of the places that things get very fiddly sometimes in fantasy games with big blocks of troops. Like, what if they touch in the corner? What if they just nick themselves? All that stuff's super clear in the book. Very simple. It gets a little abstracted sometimes, but I like what they did there because it keeps the game very simple and straightforward and doesn't get any arguments going.
And if you don't declare a charge when you're moving and you make contact, as one example of what Russ is saying, then you take a panic token and you can't attack.
Right.
So it's like a really bad scenario. So you have these things that you would almost never have in any other fantasy war game, where you almost have like a standoff between two units and they're kind of like playing chicken. Mm-hmm. And which one's going to make the charge first? Because if I put a charge on my dial and Russ puts a charge on his dial, but his charge goes off at an earlier initiative, my charge doesn't give me an attack. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting, and I think that to me that might seem frustrating to some people, but it seems more realistic to me, where you don't know what the other guy's capable of, you don't know what he's doing. Over the course of the game, you're going to start realizing, oh, his charge is like one initiative quicker than mine is, so you're trying to adapt and adjust. And that happened on one of our flanks, where for 3 turns nothing much happened because we were both trying to psych the other guy into making the charge. And
that's something that most other games don't capture, which is, so different units have different initiative steps for moving. And so what you'll end up learning, and I imagine when the elves come out, for example, you're just going to start learning where those elf units are super fast, which actually means they're probably going to move before me, consistently. And that gives them the upper hand in these situations. They're probably not as tough as I am, but they're, so I think there's a really lot of stuff going on here, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they make the different armies feel different. And I think the real question of whether or not this becomes another successful X-Wing or another failed Dust is really going to be whether or not they get those other factions out, and if they can really be as strongly thought through as these first 2 factions are. So
and the hope there, mentioning Dust, is that Dust was not their own property, so they might have been dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff on the side that was hamstringing them. So we want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I think it's going to come down to how quickly. I think right now and I know, Russ, you share these thoughts. In fact, I might be using some of your words to convey them. There's 2 aspects of a miniatures game that you need to sort of concern yourself with. One is the breadth of faction, sort of how many factions do they have, but the other one is the depth of faction. How many unit options does each faction have? And right now they've got we have two factions. Each faction has 2 troop types, 1 big monster type, and 1 commander. And hopefully, if you look at the Fantasy Flight release schedule, you're going to get some more options maybe not this month, but in the second quarter, which is what we're coming into now. So in the next couple of months. And then there's a few more coming out in the next couple of months, but it's still, I think there's going to be 4 factions by the end of the year. I totally think that. My concern is we haven't really seen any more depth to the factions, other than some command models and different poses. We haven't seen any new actual units, and that makes me a little nervous.
So we'll have to wait and see on that front.
What's that?
We'll have to wait and see on that front, but we'll see.
We're going to have to wait and see.
There's an opportunity there. But so, Crstal, what do you think? What's your after hearing us yammer on about this thing for the better part of 45 minutes or so? What do you think is your desire as a board gamer and a fan of Runebound to kind of put your toe into the Runewars miniature game?
I think it's tough because it sounds really interesting to me, but I know that miniatures games are a very big world and a very big hobby. So I still have that trepidation where I'm like, well, do I know if I'm going to like miniature gaming or war gaming at all to begin with? Because I'm generally not big into conflict in some of the games that I play. And also, while $100 sounds like a really good value for what you're getting in this box, am I going to spend $100 just to find out if I like miniature gaming? And I think what's tough for me, and probably I would imagine other board gamers as well who have some interest, is if you don't know anyone who already does miniature gaming who could theoretically kind of introduce you to it, the high price point of entry for a lot of miniatures games can be a little bit scary. I wish I had unlimited disposable income at my available at any given moment, but obviously most of us don't. So it sounds really cool, and I think this is something that I would enjoy playing, but I don't know if just my lack of knowledge, I think my lack of knowledge alone is probably would keep me from wanting to just purchase it sight unseen. But if I were, for instance, at a convention and someone had this set up and said, hey, let's play this, I'll teach it to you, I think I would say yes in an instant. So I wonder if maybe they're moving in the right direction. Like if you guys said this is kind of a little bit of a lower price point for a miniatures game, I think that they're moving in the right direction to try and get board gamers into the hobby. And truthfully, I have a friend in my game group who buys a whole lot of games all the time, so maybe I could talk him into buying it, and then I could play it with him.
There you go.
That's how you do it. Say, look, you buy it, I'll be your evil demon.
Yes.
So excellent. Well, Crstal, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here on the D6 Generation. Really, really appreciate it. If folks want to find out more about you or your co-hosts or Boardgame Blitz, where should they go on the internet to find out?
Well, we are all over the internet. I think probably the easiest way to find us is to go to boardgameblitz.com, and you can get links to all of our social media pages there. We are at Boardgame Blitz on Twitter, so that's an easy way to reach us as well. And I am at Crstal Pisano, my full first and last name. But you can find a link to that from the Boardgame Blitz Twitter as well. I tend to tweet mostly board game stuff on my personal Twitter, but some other stuff as well. So if you want to hear about other things that aren't board games, I guess follow me there. And we have a YouTube channel. We have a Twitch page that we don't stream on very often, but once in a great while we do that. We are on Instagram. We are on Facebook. We have a Board Game Geek Guild that we would love some more members to join up with that. And we have, as I mentioned in the earlier segment, we have a Patreon that we just launched literally like less than a month ago. And so obviously, if you do choose to listen to our podcast and you enjoy what you hear, just like you are probably supporting these awesome dudes right here at the D6 Generation, obviously that's first priority. These guys are putting out, I mean, come on, it's like hours of content.
It's ridiculous, let's be honest.
It's foolishness.
Awesome. And then you get those cool bonus episodes where you get to hear us gush about linguistics. That is alone worth the price of entry. So, but yes, we are on Patreon as well, doing much smaller things comparatively to the D6 Generation, but hopefully in 8 or 9 years we'll be right up there with you guys.
I have no doubt. Well, Crstal, thank you so much.
Are you trying to make us feel old?
Yes, I think that's what happened there. Crstal,
I'm trying to make the podcast feel
established.
Well established.
Yes, that's very well done. Crstal, thank you again so much. Really appreciate having the show. Best of luck to you guys. Wonderful listen to Board Game Blitz, and we wish you guys nothing but the best, and we'd love to have you back on in the future. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Maybe you guys can come visit us and talk a lot less for
we'd be happy to. That would feel like just like a snap in time. I don't even think I could even finish a donut in half an hour, never mind talking about it.
Maybe we could make an exception, but we got to keep Dunkin' Donuts for sure.
I think I'm just essential.
There you go. This Did You Ever Notice is brought to you by all of our friends at Patreon who help us keep the lights on day in and day out. No matter what happens, they're there for us, and we're there for them. And today, I would like to thank, in particular, Matt Chapman, Matt Hall, Matt L., Matthew J. Healy, and Matthew LeBaron. So that's the Matt contingent, although there's still one left. Do you ever notice how hard it can be to break a habit? And what by habit, I mean more habit of thought, actually. I'm not so much thinking about like smoking or something like that, but a habit of thought, a way of thinking. Recently, I've had this thought a couple different times and looking at a couple different things, but mainly it was those of you who have been following along my little adventures talking about skirmish games. You've been on this journey with me for a while now, for the last several episodes, and that's mainly what's been going on for me as far as breaking my habit of thought goes. And the habit of thought that I'm struggling with is that in order for me to really enjoy a miniatures game, I need to have the full service kind of deal. I need a world, I need terrain, I need all this cool stuff, and it all needs to come together in a theme, in a connective whole that makes sense to me. Warhammer 40,000, of course, happens in the grim dark of the far future. I'm drawing a total blank. I'm staring at stuff from it, and it just doesn't. Hordes and War Machine, of course, has a whole huge world that's attached to it. Even the newer games, Wild West Exodus, if I could be so bold. Beyond the Gates of Antares, and of course, lately when we've been playing Conflict 47, that it starts in this whole world and then brings it out, and you sort of add to it on your own, more or less, as the stories will probably start to develop around that as well. So I've always kind of avoided what many people call miniatures agnostic systems. So miniature systems that don't have miniatures attached to them. I don't like them. I've never liked them. They don't have an aesthetic to them, a unifying sort of artistic vision that I can sink my teeth into. And in stories that there's no depth to the world. There's no stories because there's nothing there. And I think, and that's pretty much how I've always felt. And then, of course, there was the first chink in that armor was Frostgrave. And I hadn't thought about why it didn't really bother me in Frostgrave too much, I don't think. But I think now, as I look back with a little more information at my disposal, so to speak, I think, it's fantasy, right? And so fantasy in my head is a little more generic. There's magic, and there's wizards, and there's swords and armor and arrows and crossbows and things like that. And so you can kind of almost fit Frostgrave into any sort of fantastical milieu, if you will, that you'd care to think about. And then, of course, that's even further shaped by the number of by the miniatures that you have. So if you have miniatures, you could play Frostgrave easily with fantasy mouseling miniatures, and it would be a totally different experience than if you played with, say, those awesome Dark Sword Game of Souls models. Game of Thrones. Did I say Game of Souls? Dark Sword Game of Thrones models. Yeah, anyway. But for the most part, just generic side of Tolkienian kind of stuff. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. But for some reason, I didn't look at that as changing, my way of looking at these systems. And then, lately what happened was, of course, I had the crisis of faith that was brought on by the Night Models dropping the Marvel license or losing it. There's all kinds of stories swirling about, and I have no idea what actually happened, and probably won't ever know. And I went and I found that one, paid a fortune to have that one rule set printed out for me that I really didn't care for. Should have read it before I had it printed out in colors, what I should have done. And so, but then that at the same time, I was thinking about those skirmish games, and you'll remember that I ordered the Frostgrave rule book to replace the one that was destroyed in last year's little mishap. And while I was doing that, I was online and I saw On Guard, which I thought would work perfectly with all the minis that I am collecting for Blood and Plunder. In a smaller scale battle where each model is activated individually. And I had been looking at Rogue Stars for a long time. The artwork didn't really appeal to me, And so I hadn't jumped on it, but I got a deal, so I ordered that, and I got that as well. And I started looking through it, and actually, I looked through it briefly, and I didn't care for what I saw, so many tables and everything, and so I immediately put it aside, read On Guard, was really intrigued by On Guard, obviously love Frostgrave, but the Marvel game had sort of resurrected itself in my head, and that's when I decided I could play that, and I didn't need anything else for right now, and I got all those other models. And then I don't remember. Oh, I know why. Because I stumbled upon, looking for how to play videos online, I stumbled upon Ash Barker's YouTube channel, Gorilla Miniature Gaming. Because he was doing the Marvel, had done before they canceled the game, a bunch of Marvel battle reports, and I really enjoyed them, and I enjoyed watching him do his work, and then I started to realize, oh my God, this guy does like ridiculous amounts of videos. So then I thought, I'll maybe look at one of the Rogue Stars one, and I was intrigued. I liked it. I liked what I saw. I liked that, like, it could be anything I wanted it to be. I started reading the book, and I thought, wow, there's a lot here. Now, it's fun. It's swingy. It's not ever going to be anything somebody wants to do in a tournament. Not when Han Solo he's the only one who didn't get capped. Chewbacca can get, capped in the head, one-shotted and dead. That's not gonna really fly with most people, but I thought it looked really fun. Ash, and his various guests, made it look really fun. So I started reading it, and I thought, I want to give this a try. But in order to give it a try, I know I need to get a hook into Russ somehow. And that's when I realized I was thinking about this all wrong. These systems that don't have models attached to them, the great strength of them is you can do any story you want. And there are already countless stories that you can tell. And so I thought about it a lot. I thought Infinity would have been perfect, except I sold all my Infinity models. Although I had Ariadna, which of course was the least technical. They were the guys who don't have big giant cool suits of armor and anything like that. And so the really cool aesthetic of Infinity had escaped me when I collected that army. But I started to think, ooh, I could collect some of those guys. I don't particularly care for the game. I find it too granular for me. I think of it very much as advanced squad leader for the miniatures gamers. You're tracking everything, all kinds of stuff can happen, and it's a great game. It's very tight. It's a very well written game. It's just not the game I want to play. But I could play Rogue Stars with it. But I don't have those models. So then I looked through my Bones models, and I found a bunch of generic sci-fi models that I've collected over the years through the Bones Kickstarters, and I almost primed those. And then I thought, wait a minute, I do have one collection of science fiction models that's almost already all painted up. And I dug out my Imperial Assault, and sure enough, they were all there. And I thought, this is how I'm going to get Russ into it. And that's how we ended up playing a game of Star Wars the Miniatures game, only using Rogue Stars as the rule set. And we loved it. We had a blast. It was a lot of fun. It was funny because there's a lot of innovative mechanics, and I think we're going to be looking at this game fairly soon, hopefully, on the show. So I'm not going to go into the mechanics or anything, but there's a lot there to really enjoy and appreciate. But it also a lot there that turns miniatures gaming on its head a little bit. So it's a totally new, unique experience, and we really enjoyed it because the game was so loose, basically. That you could create almost anything you can imagine in sci-fi. So I had Obi-Wan Kenobi running around doing a couple different, Jedi tricks, although not a Jedi mind trick, sadly. I had Chewbacca, I had Luke, I had Boba Fett, I had Dengar. I mean, I had all these different people who how they're supposed to work, how their equipment's supposed to work, and it worked great. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to trying to play some more of that. I don't know who I'm going to be playing it with. I think Russ really enjoyed it, but I don't know if it's something that we're going to be playing a lot of, although I really, really want to. I'm very jealous of Ash because he gets to play all these miniatures, and one of them is, I wish I could manage half the games that he plays. But I'm looking forward to maybe, I've always wanted to paint up more Infinity models, those high-tech sort of anime-looking models in particular, and they would fit right in here too. In fact, you could even stat up a tag, one of those big giant robot guys from Infinity in Rogue Stars also. So I'm definitely going to give that a try. So it's interesting, and it was funny how my mindset sort of broke and kind of changed a little bit, and I ended up doing something that I thought I wasn't ever going to do or ever going to enjoy by actually kind of working against that. What I didn't like about it. So it didn't have a world, and now it has a world. Now it has countless worlds, which I'm very excited about. And so the same thing happened at the same time in my life. Since the new year, I've actually changed how I eat, pretty drastically. And I've done that in the past, and I've lost a lot of weight, and then it slowly gets back on. But I've never felt quite the way I feel right now, and I think it's because I'm changing away, I think, again, and this time also about food, to the point where even when I go out to eat, I'm eating the healthier options, and I'm not sure how I did it or what changed. I just kind of, I decided maybe it was just time. I don't know. But so it's interesting. And I'm excited. I really hope I can get On Guard to the table soon. Also, and I think this might be something that we can look at again in the future, because there are several different companies who make rule sets without miniatures, and I think that's a neat little niche, depending on who you are that's corrected me in the past. So I think that's where we're gonna go. So that's all I have to say about that for now. More later. Thanks for listening, and good night.
Achievement unlocked! You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by either emailing us at info@the d6generation.com or by posting in our official D6G episode thread at the top of the DACA discussions forum on DACA.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. See you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and happy gaming.
The theme from Total Fangirl comes from the soundtrack of The Last Night on Earth, the zombie game, courtesy of Flying Frog Productions, and is a composition of Mary Beth Magalanes.
A little level setting here, so I'm going to check my levels. They're coming through okay. Craig, can you give me a little bit of noise there, sir?
I can get you all kinds of noise. I can't help that. I can't promise it'll mean anything.
It certainly doesn't. Crstal, can you give me a little blurb of something interesting or not?
It's an all-you-can-eat noise buffet.
It is.
You just need to take all of the noise.
Crstal is winning all the wit this evening, Craig. You have
yes.
Okay, excellent.
Falling sadly behind.
All right, great.